All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So first off, before we get to what's on the agenda here, I just wanted to kind of do a little bit of updates. There's 5 members here. I know that Nancy Bruton is out of the state, actually on the East Coast, so she won't be here tonight. And we've had 2 people that have indicated that they're not going to continue on with the committee. Alicia Shaw had a conflict with her work, and Dave Robbins has asked for that his application be removed. So we're down to 7 members at this point. I haven't heard from Naomi. I assume she's going to be here. So okay, great. So Naomi will be here, and that'll be the 6th person. It takes 5 to have a quorum, so you guys can vote on things tonight, like selecting the chair and other things. But I just wanted to give you an update. Council is meeting on the 16th, and so they probably will consider potentially adding a few more members and maybe even adding some alternates so that if other people for some reason can't make it through the process, then they'll be here. Welcome, Naomi. So there's a name tag for you, and grab a chair. So real quick, the way this is going to run tonight is we're going to kind of do some introductory stuff, some kind of preparation before the meeting starts, and then we'll actually have the formal meeting. Since this is a new committee and we're just getting things started, we kind of wanted to give you a little bit of idea of how committees typically run and the public meeting laws, as well as just some basic information, and probably the most important thing is to select a chair so that you guys can have someone run the meeting from there. So I've kind of broken, if you look at the agenda, up into meeting preparation and then the regular meeting. And so I'll kind of handle things, and this is Chad Jacobs with Beer Elsner Hammond. Chris Green is not able to be here tonight, but Chad is very well versed in this, and he'll be here, and Sylvia Murphy on staff. But I will kind of run this up until the regular meeting time, and at that point we'll turn it over to the chair, and it'll be a formal committee, and we'll get moving. So since we're all new here and haven't had a chance to meet, I thought we'd kind of do some quick introductions. So maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and then what your favorite animal is. So not to put you on the spot. So Chad.
So as Tom said, my name is Chad Jacobs. I'm from the City Attorney's Office, filling in for Chris Green, who apologizes he couldn't be here tonight. He had a bit of an emergency situation that he was dealing with. So I'm stepping in at the last minute, and if I would have known I had this assignment, I wouldn't have come. My family, a little bit about myself. I've been with the Beer Ales in Hammond for about 2 years now. Before that, I was general counsel for the League of Oregon Cities for about 3 years, and before that, I was with a senior deputy city attorney in the city and county of San Francisco for about 9 years. I have 2 kids and a wife, and I would say my favorite animal is my dog, Albie.
Great.
Albie, like Albus Dumbledore. My kids named him. Exactly.
So my name is Tom Pessimir. I'm the assistant city manager here at the city of Sherwood. And I'm on staff, obviously, and here to support this committee. Council specifically asked that I kind of be the staff member to help on this. A little bit about myself. Pretty much a native Oregonian. I was actually born in Washington, lived there for about 3 months, and so my wife tells me I'm not really an official native Oregonian, but I consider myself an Oregonian. Grew up in the Valley and then Central Oregon, and then been here in the Sherwood area for about 15 years. So I have a wife and 4 kids, 11, 10, 8, and 4. And my favorite animal right now is actually rabbits, but typically I like to, I enjoy beekeeping, so that's something I enjoy to do. But.
I'm Sylvia Murphy. I'm the city recorder, also known as the city clerk. I've been a recorder for about 7 years and here on staff at the city of Sherwood for almost 14 years. So basically I support the council, as you guys have seen me here, and I'm here to help you do anything that we need to do to get this committee rolling and address business. As far as me personally, I am married, have 2 children, 17 and 13. Live just outside the city limits a little bit. I've lived here in Sherwood for about 20 years total. And my favorite pet, my only pet, is my dog Rizzer.
My name's Beth Cook, and she knows how to respond. I've lived here for about 2 years. I'm a Portland, Oregon native. I was raised in the Valley as well, and moved to Portland metro area about 15 years ago. I have lived in Yamhill County until up to the last 2 years, and have 3 children, 10, almost 8, and just turned 5. All going to be in the same elementary school this next year, which I'm very excited about. Professionally, I do a variety of things. I work a lot with businesses, do a lot of business outreach, and just finished 6 months lobbying in the legislature. And my favorite animal is a cat.
My name is Merit Meyer, and I am an official native Oregonian. I graduated from Oregon State. I've lived in Sherwood about 21 years. I've owned 2 homes in Sherwood. And let's see, I am a mom of 2 boys, 12 and 3.5, who keep me very busy. Both of them think that they're much older than they are, of course. And at the moment, my favorite animal is a ladybug, keeping my garden safe.
My name is Doug Scott. I'm also a native Oregonian. I grew up in Hubbard, down the road a ways. I've lived in probably a 10-mile radius of here most of my life, including the last 5 years in Sherwood. My wife and I have 3 children, 11 and 7-year-old girls, and an 8-month-old son who's keeping us busy. He started crawling this week, so that's fun. We have 2 house cats, but my favorite animal is probably a tiger.
My name is Lawrence O'Keefe. I lived here in the Sherwood area in Sherwood 7 years. I've lived in the metro area since I was 10 years old. So went to Beaverton, lived in West Lynn for a while, over in Portland for a while, and happy to make Sherwood my home. Been married 7 years now, a little over 7 years, and I guess I'm the only person with grandkids. So I have grandkids and a son in the Marines.
You didn't say your favorite animal.
My favorite animal, my wife would kill me, Tabigale O'Kitty, which is our cat.
Nice. Is it still on? Are we still on? Yes. I'm Rachel Shaning, and my husband and I own Fat Milo's Family Kitchen here in town. I am the chef. We've been here for about we've owned our restaurant for about 3.5 years. We live in Beaverton. We are not native Oregonians, and I did come from the state down south of here. Don't hold that against me. I have 4 children and 1 granddaughter. My daughters are 22 and 21, and one is at Portland State, one is a mom, and I have a son who will be going into Oregon State in September, and another son who is in elementary school. He's 10. Let's see, my favorite animal is a pig because I love bacon, but I should say it's Milo because he's our dog, and we named our restaurant after him.
Oh, Milo, right. My name is Naomi Belov, and I live on Lincoln Street here in Sherwood. I've lived here almost 2 years now. We moved here from the Boston area. I was born in Colorado, grew up in Maine, and have always thought that the West was like an interesting place to explore, so it's fun to be here. We just took a trip to the Redwoods, and we love this area. The Northwest is really beautiful. And I'm here just to serve the people of Sherwood and to give voice to the 1,800 people that said they want to have ordinances passed. So happy to be here. We just adopted a dog from Oregon Dog Rescue. His name's Dexter. He's a yellow lab. He's really cute. So that's my favorite animal right now.
Nice.
Your 2 children? Oh yes, Nadia and Andrew. 2 kids.
Great. Well, thank you. Good to know a little bit about everybody, and thank you for being here. So I'm going to quickly just kind of go through the resolutions and kind of the process to form the committee. These are actually in your materials that you have before you. So there's really, there was a lot of conversation that happened, and council determined that they basically wanted more input on potential ordinances. So they've formed this committee, and the task of this committee really is to make recommendations to council in regards to potential ordinances that they may end up referring to voters. So I think the process is for this committee to make a recommendation to council. They may or may not determine to put those into a ballot title and refer those to the voters, but they certainly want this committee to make the best effort that they possibly can in order to see what type of ordinances may end up being referred to the voters. Just real quickly, and Sylvia will go over this in more detail, but there's a very tight timeline to do this, to get on the November election. It takes time to put the ballot titles together, as well as for council to do their work. So we'll go through the schedule in more detail, but essentially you have about a month to go through this. So as we get into the schedule and things, that's something to consider, because there's a lot of work to do, and I'm sure that Barry Elsner is probably a little concerned about being able to put together the actual ordinance texts so that they meet all the state, federal laws, and can be something that is pretty much bulletproof, because when they're put together ordinances like this, they're going to have to be past scrutiny and be something that will pass the courts if necessary. So they have a daunting task as well as you do. So really, I think that's kind of the essential portion of the committee. One of the decisions by the council was to have 9 members, 4 which represented which conduct business within the city. It got to be a little bit interesting, because what does conduct mean? And I know as they went through the process of selecting, that was a conversation piece, because there weren't a whole lot of applicants that did conduct business in Sherwood. So I think they took a pretty liberal view of what that was, because the term wasn't very specific. I think in hindsight, probably would have been better to have a more definitive word there, but that's okay. And then 5 members are residents in the city. So they passed a resolution on July 2nd that basically set up this committee. I will mention that in the original legislation, it required that committee members be appointed by a resolution of council, which is typically the way that they appoint members for all boards and committees. So that means that they just can't change things real quickly. So that's why if they do want to add members, they'd have to wait till their next meeting where they had a quorum to do that. And that's why they're taking a look at this, potentially adding members and alternates on the 16th. So on July 2nd, they selected residences and representatives who conducted business in Sherwood. There was a process that happened. It was a very quick process, and as we're doing everything in this committee, everything is quick, and when that happens, nothing happens as well as it should. And Sylvia is very detail-oriented, and I can tell you that it drives her crazy when we try to do things quick and you miss dotting I's and crossing T's, and that's just going to happen, and that's just, unfortunately, with the time constraints that we have, that's going to be that way. So I know that the mayor and Linda and myself looked through all the applications. There were other counselors that looked at the applications and gave their input as well, and so they ultimately made a decision, which resulted in you being here tonight. So, again, welcome. So Chad's going to go over kind of doing some training here so you guys can understand how committees run, and just some public meeting law information and some other things. You can feel free to ask him questions, either at the beginning or end, as Chad so chooses.
All right, so I'll try to make this a little interesting so you don't fall asleep. You know, this is never necessarily the most interesting topic to listen to, but it's an important topic because you guys want to be able to focus on policy, especially given the short amount of time period that you have to get your work done. You don't want to get bogged down in controversies over public meetings and public records and things of that nature. So we want to make sure that you guys have the tools from the beginning to be able to do your work, and that's sort of the purpose of this. I am more than happy to have you interrupt me at any time. If for nothing else, it will help keep everyone else awake. So, if you have a question, feel free to just jump right in. We don't need to wait till the end. If you want to wait till the end, that's fine as well. But, the more of a conversation we have, I think the better learning experience it'll be for everyone. The one thing, you have a couple handouts regarding public records and public meetings. One is a quick reference guide, which is something that's prepared by Open Oregon, and it's a very basic overview, and it's a really great overview to sort of put things in very simple terms. I also prepared rather quickly today a document for you guys that goes into a little more detail about public meetings and public records. In addition to these, on the Attorney General's website, she has the Public Records and Open Meetings Manual, which will go into great detail about all these laws, should you have questions. In addition, our office is available to answer questions that you have about this, so don't feel like we're giving you the information today and you're out on your own, that's it. We are certainly here to help you guys out, but I want to make sure that you at least have a basic overview of the public records and public meetings. And then at the end, I'll also go over sort of the basic way committees generally function. My guess and assumption is that you are appointed on this committee because you are somewhat active in the community, so you probably have some familiarity with the way the city council runs or the planning commission runs. So hopefully all this won't be brand new to you, but I will try to make it quick and simple for you to the extent I can. The first thing I want to talk about is public meetings. And with both public meetings and public records, the most basic point to remember for you is that as a member of this advisory committee, you are now a public official, basically a member of the city family, which makes you subject to these laws. So the public meeting laws, in the most basic sense, require bodies such as you to conduct their business in front of the public. Now, what does that mean, conduct your business? It basically means that you may not make a decision or deliberate towards a decision outside the scope of the public view. And making a decision, most everyone understands what that is. Okay, we're going to vote, we're all going to come to a consensus, whatever the case might be. The deliberation towards the decision is where it gets a little more complicated, especially in situations with email and Facebook and Twitter and those things that I'll talk about in a little more detail. So always keep in mind that it's not just the actual decision making, but it's also that deliberation towards a decision where the law is going to apply. The other key aspect to remember is that it applies to you as a body, not to you individually. And what that means as a body, as Tom said at the beginning, is that you have to have a quorum to act. So the law only applies when a quorum of you are deliberating or making a decision. And in this case, since there's a 9-member body, a quorum would be 5 of you. So if 3 of you want to get together outside the scope of the public and talk and conspire and smoke cigars in a back room and cut whatever deal you're going to do, that's absolutely fine. It's not a problem. The public may not like that, but it doesn't violate the law. But as soon as you get to 5 people deliberating towards a decision or making a decision outside the scope of the public, that violates the law. Now, when we talk about when a quorum is together, it's simple when we talk about all of you together in one room somewhere. You're out to eat at a restaurant, you're here, on a break. You need to make sure that you're not talking about those topics that are within the jurisdiction of this body. Now, if you're talking about topics outside the jurisdiction of the body, that's not a violation of the law. If you want to talk about, how late the library should be staying open, that's fine, because that's not within the purview of this body. But if it's anything within the purview of this body, you need to make sure that a quorum of you are not discussing that together. Where it gets really tricky and where the law is not entirely clear is how that applies in situations where you're not all in the same room together at the same time. So for example, what happens if you're all sending emails together? Or what happens if someone has a Facebook page and you're all commenting on Facebook? Or someone has a Twitter account and you're all following and retweeting and going back and forth on Twitter? Basically what the law says is that it applies to not only meetings in person, but also to electronic communications. And there's been some controversy about whether or not that means that it has to be simultaneous. So you have to be, for example, like in some sort of chat room or something where you're all going back and forth at the same time. Or can it also apply to situations where you're having emails that are spread apart by a couple hours or even a couple days? Can it apply to Facebook where someone's posting on somebody's wall different comments and you guys are all commenting back and forth with each other? My advice to everyone has always been to avoid those situations. You don't want to be the test case. There was a situation down in Lane County a couple of years ago now where a circuit court, a trial court level, basically found a violation with email communications. So you want to be careful not to be the one who basically causes that controversy to arise. So if you get an email sent out from staff saying, here's information, and staff sends you all that email, that is okay because there's no deliberations going on. It's just a one-way communication. Likewise, if there's some newspaper article, let's say you're reading the Florida Times Gazette, and there's an article about some regulation that you thought might be interesting for people to see. You could send a copy of that article along to everyone, and that would be fine. That's not a deliberation. But what you don't want to do is hit the reply all button, because when you hit reply all, then all of a sudden you're beginning that deliberation process. And if 5 of you are starting to have that input, you could potentially violate the law with an email meeting in that sense. Same thing I would say on Facebook, same thing on Twitter. If multiple people, if 5 people are commenting on a Facebook page, you don't want to be the 5th person commenting on that Facebook page. If you see 4 people have already commented, don't provide any more information. The other area where it gets a little tricky is something called serial meetings. And a serial meeting is basically a series of meetings in which you guys are deliberating towards a decision. And that can occur in multiple ways. It can occur using staff as a conduit. It can occur using yourselves as a conduit. It can occur using email as a conduit. So for example, if one of you sends an email to 3 others, 4 of you are now communicating via email back and forth. It's not a quorum, so it's not a violation of the law. One of the 4 of you decides, I'm going to send this on to a 5th member because I really think he or she should know what's being discussed. So that 5th member gets a copy of all those communications back and forth. Even though that didn't occur sort of simultaneously in that one email, you now have a quorum of you, 5 of you, communicating in these series of conversations, which could constitute a meeting. And that same circuit court down in Lane County found some violations for these serial meetings, which is the first time that that's occurred in Oregon. Again, the law is not entirely clear here. A lot of people feel that circuit court judge got it wrong down in Lane County. But again, you don't want to be the next test case for that. So you want to avoid that, which basically means that you don't want to go sort of collecting votes behind the scenes saying, well, here's what this committee member thinks, and here's what this committee member thinks, and here's what this committee member thinks, and sort of sharing views with other committee members' views with a quorum of the body, because that would be a serial meeting. Likewise, staff or our office, for example, may brief you guys individually, but if we do that, we wouldn't do it in a manner to share the views of the other committee members with you. We're just going to tell you what our information is. It's that one-way push of information, and we won't allow ourselves to be used as a conduit of information between the different committee members. And that's what you want to avoid as individuals as well. So that's sort of a lot of dumping on you about public meetings. Are there any questions on that kind of stuff before I move on? Okay. So in addition to making your decisions deliberating public, the public meeting laws require a couple other things, and they don't require some things. I just want to go over those real briefly. Most of this staff will handle about what's required. So for example, you have to have an agenda. You have to provide notice of your meetings. You have to allow public observation. So it has to be in a place that's accessible. If you decide that you want to have a meeting somewhere other than here, you want to have a meeting in a restaurant, for example, that's permissible, but you have to make sure that the restaurant's going to allow everyone to come in, even if they're not going to order, to observe what you're doing. Staff will take care of doing the notices and the agendas. Likewise, you have to have minutes, and staff will take care of taking those minutes. You will have to approve the minutes of your meetings, but staff will be responsible for doing all that. The one thing the public meetings laws actually do not require is public comment. Now, you are free to allow public comment, to set up time for public comment, but the public meeting law under the state law is a public observation law, not a public participation law. So basically what that means is that if someone is shouting out from the public or they want to engage you in a conversation, you're not required to do that under the public meeting laws. Now, you very well may want to have periods of public comment and have public participation, and you may have that as a section on your agenda to do so, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you do that, you just need to make sure that whatever rules you establish, for example, time limits for public participation or for public comment, are applied equally across the board. Okay? The only sort of exception, or actually, before I get there, one more thing that the public meeting laws does require.
Can I ask a quick question about the comment?
Yep.
Can you let's say we had on the agenda for a specific meeting to talk about a specific ordinance or category of ordinances. Could we limit the public comment to only be in the scope of that, what we were deliberating on that evening?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The other thing that the public meetings laws does require is for you to take action, you have to do it by a public vote. So, and a public vote basically has to record each member's vote. So you can't have secret ballots. You all have to go on the record and say, this is how I'm voting. The last thing that I'll talk about with public meetings is that the only exception to these deliberations outside the course of the public view is an executive session. And executive sessions are permitted for only very limited subjects that are set forth in the law. Most of them will not apply to your work. I can foresee or imagine situations where you may need advice from our office about the legality of some ordinance that you may be proposing or some potential legal challenges to that, which may warrant an executive session. So that may be a reason why we could go into executive session. But other than that, there's probably not going to be many situations where you will be having any kind of meeting outside the scope of the public view. In the executive session, you may already be familiar with this, but generally the people who are in the executive session are members of the committee, staff who are necessary to participate, and members of the media are also permitted to attend most executive sessions. There's a few exceptions to that, but as a general rule, members of the media are allowed to attend executive sessions. Okay? All right, that's the really quick overview of public meetings. You guys are all staying awake so far. That's great. Public records. So as a part of the city family, you guys are also now subject to public records laws. Now, public records laws in the most basic sense have two aspects. The first aspect is that if a member of the public wants to view a public record, they can make a public records request, and if the city has a record that's responsive to that request, they need to share a copy of that public record with the member of the public, unless an exemption applies that the city can rely upon. The other aspect of the public records laws is a retention requirement. So under state law, if there is something that is a public record, the city is required to retain that for a certain period of time, depending on the type of record that it is. And if you destroy a record, if you willfully destroy a record when you know you're supposed to be retaining it, that can actually constitute a crime under state law. So you want to be very careful about sort of how that all plays out. And let me talk about all that in a little more detail. Basically, a public record under the law is any record, no matter what form it's in, that the government uses to conduct its business. So the agendas that we send you, the handouts that we gave you tonight, all these things are public records. The notes that you may take at a meeting tonight are also public records. It also doesn't matter what form it's in. So emails that you send or receive about your business on the committee are public records. Other sorts of electronic communications, videotape, if the videotape of the meeting that the city may have is a public record. So whatever format it's in, whether it's electronic or written, it's still a public record. The difficult aspect of this, and one of the things that we'll want to talk about and you guys want to think about, is how you're going to use things such as email. Because even though you may be on your home private computer, even though you may be using your own private email address, the fact that you are on this committee and you're talking about committee business using that email address makes that email a public record. So one of the things you may want to consider is establishing a separate Gmail account or some sort of account like that for committee business. And that way, to the extent that you have any public records requests or there's any issues related to public records, you don't have to worry about going through your private emails or potentially having a court go through all your private emails, and they'll just be able to look at this one account. And if you do receive an email into your other account, you would probably want to forward that on to this Gmail account or whatever other account you establish. So that way all those records are in one spot for future reference if this issue ever arises. The other thing you may want to consider is, depending on the nature of the communication and working it out with Sylvia, of course, you may want to copy her on some of these communications. So that way the city can have a record of the communication and the city can be responsible for retaining that as opposed to you retaining that. Now, I fully recognize there may be some situations where you may not want to do that. You may want to wait to do that until after the committee's done its work, a month or a month and a half from now, and then give copies to Sylvia so then you can wash your hands of everything. But that'll help you sort of with the retention process, so you don't have to worry about you personally being responsible for retaining those records. With the retention, the important thing to keep in mind is that the city is only required to keep one official copy of each record. So the agenda, for example, that we passed out tonight, or this handout that we passed out tonight, Sylvia will already have copies of those. So if you get home tonight and you're saying, oh, should I recycle this agenda? You can feel free to go ahead and recycle that, because the city already has an official copy of that. If you're taking your own personal notes, you're sending your own personal emails, the city doesn't have copies of those, so your copy is probably the one official copy that the city has. So you're going to be personally responsible for retaining that, unless you somehow work out with Sylvia to give her a copy so the city can keep that copy for you.
I have a question about.
Yep.
Does that mean that if we copy Sylvia, it's automatically out of our hands? So she automatically assumes responsibility for the retention?
Well, that's why I'm saying you'll want to work that out with Sylvia, so she
Okay.
knows to do that.
Okay, I get it.
I wouldn't assume that she's going to do that. I mean, Sylvia's great. She's one of the best city recorders that I know. And most likely she would do that. But
Okay.
you'll, for your own personal protection, you'll want to just confirm with her that that's the way it'll work out.
Got it.
And I would prefer to do that.
I would assume
prefer to
as much.
support you in that manner, that when you communicate either with Tom or with the city manager or with an elected official, just CC me, and I dump that email into your folder, the committee folder. That way I have a record of the entire committee folder, not necessarily the individual. It's there, but it's a committee folder.
Got it.
So you would prefer to get those as we go instead of at the end?
Whatever works for you. If you want to manage them on your own and then give it to me on a disk or a photocopy, so whatever works for you. Just know that in the end or during that interim, you're responsible for it. When I get them, I can't say if something's missing or not, because I don't know. So I can basically only maintain the record that's given to me.
Along those same lines, handwritten notes, is it acceptable to just scan an email to you directly?
Sure. The one thing that I would ask is on your notes, just to give me your name, who it's from, a date, if it pertained to a meeting or those notes, you wrote them here, just so that when I catalog them, I just don't have a Post-it, I just don't have miscellaneous stuff. It's the member of this committee on this date.
Okay.
Any more questions about retention? What about any questions about public records in general, about what they are? Okay. So that's the quick overview of public records. Now I'm going to move on to the last aspect, which is the basic structure of committees. And, again, I think you guys probably have a pretty good grasp on what this is. And to a certain extent, you have a lot of flexibility in how you want to run your committee. For basic purposes of being able to get things done, though, at the meeting, as required by the resolution, you will elect a chair and I believe a vice chair, correct? That's correct. The chair is the presiding officer and will run the meeting. The vice chair basically steps in when the chair is unavailable. To run your meeting, you'll basically want to use the basic form of Robert's Rules of Order, where people will make a motion. You'll need a second for the motion. Once that motion has been seconded, then you can have a debate on what the motion is, and then you'll have a vote. Now, there's procedures to amend the motion. There's procedures to table a motion, all those sorts of things that we can help you with, while you're at the meeting. Sylvia can help you with them. Our office can help you with them. I'm sure Tom can help you with them. So to the extent you have questions about procedure, certainly ask us. As far as how you conduct your business, again, whether or not to accept public comment, when to accept public comment, how you want to structure the agenda. Generally, the chair will help structure the agenda, but generally with a group like this, if a majority of you want to do something, then you would just vote to say, this is how we want the agenda, this is what we want the meeting to be like. You guys have such a short time period to get your work done. I think, that's really the only way it's going to work, is for people to basically have a majority of the body say, this is how we want to proceed, and that's what the agenda will look like. As far as then the report to the council, I think it's completely up to you guys what you want to do. If you want to establish a system of saying, here's what a majority of us believe should be referred, here's what a minority of us believe should be referred, or just vote on, this is the only thing the majority of us agreed upon, so that's the only thing we're referring up to the city council. I think you guys have a lot of leeway. There's not a lot of guidance in the resolution or from the council that I'm aware of, and Tom should jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, since I am just filling in for Chris. I don't want to make a big mistake here. But my reading of the resolution and generally the powers of a body such as yours is that you have a lot of flexibility in deciding, what is the final quote unquote work product that you want to provide to the council, and in what manner you want to provide that to the council. Just knowing, as we'll talk about next, that there are some pretty tight time frames for you to get your work done if you do want to get something on the November ballot. Any questions about procedure or anything that you may have now that you want me to answer?
No, let me just make a comment about what Chad said there. So first off, council did discuss whether or not they wanted to limit the type of conversations or ordinances that you could consider, and determined that they didn't want to do that. So I think that's a pretty clear indication that you have a fairly free reign to talk about the items that you want. The one caveat that I will add to that is, after talking about it with Chris and Chad both, changes to section 16 of our code, which is our land use code, probably aren't doable just because of the time constraints. There's a 45-day notice to DLCD. There's also a requirement that there's public hearings before Planning Commission and Council. And so there wouldn't be any way that the ordinances related to the land use section of our code that I could see could actually be accomplished in the time that you've been given. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there as you guys are thinking about things, because you do have great latitude to talk about ordinances, but if you start getting into land use laws, it's going to be problematic.
So while those couldn't be accomplished in the time frame of the November ballot, we could still conceivably forward those to council as something to consider outside the concept of the ballot, or to forward on to the Planning Commission potentially.
You may be able to, but it's pretty clear to me that the way that the resolution was put together, that they were looking specifically for ordinances that potentially could be referred to the voters. So I think that was somewhat fairly clear direction that they gave
For this ballot.
for the November ballot. That's correct.
That's all I had.
And just one other quick thing in regards to public records laws. If any of you do decide to create a separate email account, which would not be a bad idea, just let us know. We have a distribution list that we can update. If you email Sylvia and myself, we'll make sure that list gets corrected. You'll notice that as I sent things out, I sent them out as a distribution list, so you couldn't reply to all, anticipating that you hadn't had this training yet, and that might be an issue. If there's benefit to the community members you want, we can certainly share individual emails with you, but I'll probably continue to send things out in a distribution list. So if you accidentally hit reply all, it won't go to those members, and you'll have to make a conscious decision to send that to other members of the committee, so you can think about that as you move forward.
So basically, next on your agenda, we're going to discuss the timeline. I provided you with the document which shows a calendar for July, August, and September. So basically, I noted on the calendar the dates that this community room is being used: council meetings, planning commission, parks board, those general other public meetings. So when you consider scheduling your future meetings, to kind of avoid those dates, as we'll probably have to meet in this larger room. The smaller room in the back probably can't accommodate the public in this committee. So consider those available dates. I did also include basically the month of August is probably the month that has most of the items that you need to consider as far as the deadlines. We have in the resolution adopted by council, they noted that on August the 6th, that's when they're going to be looking for your written report or recommendation. So as you look at August the 6th as your deadline, think about the days in July, with summer being here, when people are available to meet. Again, basically any of those days that are open on the calendar, this room is open. And staff is here to support whatever days you guys decide to hold those meetings. So basically you have that deadline of August the 6th. The other deadline that's really, really important is the date of August the 20th. For example, if you guys do make a recommendation to the council by August the 6th, council is going to obviously deliberate. They're going to probably have lots of deliberation on that night. Hopefully there's a direction from council at that time to direct staff to draft legislation, to direct legal counsel to draft the ballot title and the explanatory statement. So that is a key night that they have a pretty solid recommendation that they can move forward with to give staff direction. So basically what will happen is at the next council meeting on the 20th of August, that's when they would look to adopt that legislation. Adopt the legislation, the council has to adopt the ballot title, and they have to adopt an explanatory statement. Those two documents cannot go, number one, to the noticing. We have to notice it in Oregonian, and it cannot make the ballot unless it's adopted. So that's something, again, that's really key, that they have concrete information to consider. The ordinances that night, ordinances are typically effective per the charter 30 days from adoption. We'll insert language in that ordinance to have an emergency clause to have it effected immediately so that it can be adopted that night, effective that night, so that the following day, which is August the 21st, I will immediately take those documents that are adopted, forward that information over to the Oregonian so it can be in the public notice section. The Oregonian usually requires a 24 to 72 hour from the time that I submit my order to them before it's actually published. So depending on the timeline, usually they have like a 3 or 4 o'clock cutoff time, and that kind of determines the 24 or the 72 hour. So I put on the calendar as well the potential notification in the publication, which would be the Oregonian, which is where we post those notices. Either it would be in the Friday Oregonian or the Saturday Oregonian, again, depending on when I get that to them. Public notices for ballot titles and explanatory statements have a 7-day noticing requirement. So basically, once it's posted, the public has 7 days to contest that title and that language in the explanatory statement. So we have to wait until August 31st, kind of that waiting period. So after August the 31st, we can basically move to get documents to the ballot. So after that deadline, my marching orders kind of start, and I submit those documents over to the county. And that deadline to do that would be September the 5th. So basically I have, considering the holiday of September the 2nd, I have the 3rd and the 4th to complete those documents and get them over to the county for that ballot. That's pretty much the timeline.
So one thing I'll mention, and council was fairly specific on this, when Sylvia says on August 6th they may direct staff to draft ordinances, that means just putting the words into an actual ordinance title. They expect by that time to actually have the language worked out as much as it possibly can, and the attorneys having reviewed it and put it all together. There's a number of things that you'll have to consider going through that, and so it's a tight timeline because there's a lot of legalese that needs to go into the documents, and so the clearer that you are as to what you want as a committee, the earlier, the easier it'll make everybody's ability to do that. So why don't we move on to the next section unless you guys have any questions, and that is to basically select a chair. And so if you notice on the way we put this together, I'm going to kind of lead the discussion on selecting a chair. And then item 3 of the regular meeting is actually ratifying the selection of the chair. And the reason is because you actually aren't an official committee until you've selected the chair and started the meeting. So we'll kind of go through a 2-step process, but I want to make sure that we kind of have an organized process to select the chair, since there isn't a leader amongst you yet, although there very soon will be. Also, I'll mention that in the regular meeting, all the rest of the agenda after selecting the vice chair, item number 5 is a discussion and vote on the remaining agenda. I just threw some ideas out here for you to consider trying to get things started. The one item that's definitely missing from this conversation is what I'm calling threshold, and that's a determination on which type of groups these might apply to. My thoughts on that were it would probably be better to talk about the ordinances and figure out what you want to do, and then have a conversation later on about who that might apply to, because it might change, the way that you view things. So I'll let you think on that. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is ask for nominations for the chair position of this committee. You can nominate yourself. I'll accept nominations for a period of time, and then ask the question of, each of the people that are nominated of why they think they would make a good chair. We'll go into voting. If there's a tie vote, we'll take a second vote. If there's more than two, we will just select the top two vote getters after that point. And if we're still tied on things, I'll probably ask you additional questions until you guys are able to come to some sort of agreement where there is more votes for one person than another. You can vote for yourself in this process, and so I'm going to open it to nominations for the chair of the special committee.
I'd like to nominate Mirta.
Great. Other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Beth Cook as the assistant.
Okay. Beth Klein. And there will be a separate process to select the vice chair after we've selected the chair. So, but no, thank you. That's good. Good comment. I'm going to give you plenty of time to think about it. You can nominate yourself, remember? Okay, well, let's do this formally then.
Motion to close the nomination
Yes,
process.
Motion to close the nomination process, and I happen to be looking through Robert's Rules of Order, and that actually takes a 2/3 vote of the committee. So, closing nominations, do we have a vote of 2/3 of people who want to close it?
Aye.
There we go. All right, so I think for Sylvia's purpose, I'm going to have you raise your hands. Who would like to elect Mirta Meyer as the chair of the special committee? You vote yourself, Mirta.
Oh, okay.
All right, that's a unanimous vote, and we'll ask you guys to ratify that here in just a minute. So I am going to turn this meeting over to Mirta Meyer, the chair of the special committee.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So,
So we're at item 1 on the agenda, which would be calling to order the meeting, and then Sylvie would do the roll call from there.
okay, it is 7:20, and I'd like to call this special committee meeting to order. Do I need to say the date?
You should.
Okay. Today is Wednesday, July 10th. Special committee meeting is now called to order at 7:20 p.m.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, I'll just call out your name, and if you just want to say present or here or raise your hand, we are being recorded, so whatever works for you. So, Chair Mirta Meyer,
Here.
Beth Cook,
Here.
Doug Scott,
Here.
Larry O'Keefe,
Here.
Rachel Schoening,
Good enough. Here.
and Naomi Belov. Here. Thank you. And the record also indicates staff present. Thank you.
And item 3 on our agenda tonight is to ratify the selection of myself as chair. I'm not exactly sure how to do that.
I think you would essentially entertain a motion to do that. You could certainly, as a motion, then you could have discussion if you need to, or put it up for a vote as it moves forward. And I probably would use the terms ratify in the motion, whoever makes it.
I would like to make a motion to ratify the selection of Mirta Meyer as the chair of the special committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? And thank you. Item number 5 is a discussion and vote on a remaining agenda. Oh, it's the election of the vice chair. Thank you. Would anyone like to make a nomination for a vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Rachel.
I would need a second or another nomination.
I will second that. That's okay with you?
Sure.
And now, do I say all in favor? Or do I say, are there any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Doug Scott.
I'd like to second that, if I may. And so I think that we should have a discussion about that.
I'll start. Thank you. I'm honored. I think that given that the council set up this committee with 5 citizen members and 4 members from business, I think the selection of the chair being from the citizen side there was good reason for that, given the breakdown of the committee members, and I think that conversely, the vice chair being from the business side selection, I think makes a lot of logical sense. So I would be in favor of Rachel in that sense.
Okay. Any other comments? Please.
Rachel, perhaps I'd be interested in anything you could tell us that you would bring to the vice chair position.
I am, obviously, I'm a business owner. I am familiar with the Roberts Rule of Law, and I've sat on a few chairs and committees, so I might be able to be helpful in that aspect. I'm not opposed. I'm not excited. I'm happy to do it. How's that?
Okay, that's fair. I have a question, if I may ask a question. I can tell you that I will be on vacation the latter part of August. Will you be here?
I own a business. I won't be going on vacation.
Okay. That's helpful.
I would make a motion to close nominations for vice chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you, Rachel. Okay.
Make a motion to vote.
Didn't we just vote?
We just closed
No,
nominations.
I closed the meeting.
Second.
Motion.
All in favor?
So I believe you actually have 2 nominations that were seconded, so you
Right.
probably are going to want to ask
Oh,
for that hand count or something,
Right.
so it's clear as to who's voting for whom.
Okay, so all in favor of ratifying the selection of Rachel as vice chair of special committee? Any opposed? And no one is opposed? Thank you. And now that that is complete, let's begin our conversation on the types of ordinances that we would like to consider recommending to council.
You skipped number 5 now.
I keep skipping. Discussion
You're
of
one item ahead.
remaining agenda. We did that.
Yeah, I don't know that you have. Again, like I said earlier, this is really just some ideas that I had.
Okay.
You might want to. I put that item there particularly because I didn't want to think that I was trying to influence you guys on what you
pardon me.
what you
Okay.
might be wanting to discuss or the order that you want to discuss
okay.
it in.
Okay.
I think the only really important item to us is at some point in time we have a discussion on upcoming meeting schedule.
I actually think we should do that next.
Great.
Do I need to make a motion for that, or can we just? Okay.
I think we can just talk.
So I think, given what I've heard from Sylvia and Tom, our window here is basically 4 weeks. We have to report back to the council by the 6th of August. That gives 4 full weeks, which count including this week. So that's not a lot of time, and I would be in favor of two meetings per week if we can all swing that. I think that Monday is an obvious choice given the hole in the schedule, and then maybe either. I know I'd like to go to Music in the Park as well, so I'd be more in favor of Thursday rather than Wednesday, but I could do either depending on the will of the committee.
I would make a motion to delete Wednesdays in July so we could attend Music on the Green. Mondays and Thursdays would work really well for me.
I will say that the only day that I can do during the day is Monday. Otherwise, I'm in the kitchen until 2.
And the one thing I will mention is that on Thursday the 18th, there will be a SERPAC meeting. Technically, we could find another venue for that. However, I have to be at that meeting, so that would probably be a problem.
What
for
time
me.
is the SERPAC meeting? Tom?
6:30.
Is this an agreeable time for everyone during the day, or is there a time that works better for people?
And we're talking about the next 3 weeks, is that right?
4 weeks, I think,
4 weeks.
including
August.
this week. So
Well,
6:30 is a great time for me. Is everyone else all right with that? And staff is okay with that time? And then how does everyone feel about Mondays? Let's talk about Mondays in particular. So what we're looking at is Monday the 15th, the 22nd, the 29th, and the 5th as a
Right.
final hurrah for the month of August. Can everyone
The
do-
5th has a Parks Board meeting on the calendar.
Oh, but we could potentially use the other room if necessary?
Actually, they could
They
use
could.
the other room. They commonly meet in there, so.
Okay.
And can SERPAC meet? It would just be that we'd be meeting without you. And
That's
is
correct.
that not advised, or can someone fill in for you?
I'll let you determine that, but to be honest with you, the staffing for the special committee, we don't have a whole lot of extra staff
Sure.
who would probably be available to fill in. We will bring other staff members in as you get into things, specifically Julia Hyduke may come in, or as we get into different topics where other people have expertise, we'll bring other staff in to fill in. But
Would Sylvia be available on the 18th, or are you
Does she go where you go?
busy with SERPAC as well?
Oh, I'm available.
Okay, so if we had Sylvia, we could technically meet without staff, right? Or is that not allowed?
that's correct. Yeah, you absolutely don't have to have me here.
What time is the SERPAC meeting?
6:30.
6:30.
6:30. So if we met for an hour prior, that would work better for you for that.
That would be fine with me.
5:30, what date was that?
5:30 on the 18th.
Before we move on to the Thursday, can we close out our Monday discussion? Are Mondays good for everyone? Yes? Okay. So now let's go to Thursdays. So on Thursdays, we're looking at the 11th, the 18th, the 20th, and the 25th.
I'm sorry, Meredith, is the 11th, are we going to stick with 6:30 with the exception of the 18th?
Oh, that's a good point. 6:30 does work for me.
Okay.
How do you feel with that?
6:30.
Yeah. Naomi, are you good, Lawrence?
Yes.
Rachel, does that work for you?
Sure.
And Doug, are you
Yep.
good with that? Okay, so 6:30 all meetings.
With the
Uh,
exception of the 18th?
Well, unless we can do 6:30 here and SERPAC can be relocated.
I think where Beth was going was that we would meet for an hour before, and then, so Tom could be with us for an hour before his SERPAC meeting.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. And then we could continue our meeting.
That's correct.
Without you.
And I could probably even slide SERPAC till 7, so we'll flex around that. But if you want to meet at 5:30, and I'll stay as long as I can, that works for me. Yeah, that works.
Okay. So Mondays and Thursdays? Okay. Do we need a motion on the calendar, Sylvia? No.
No, you don't need a motion. I just need to clarify for my record so I can book the room. So you have Monday, the 15th at 6:30.
Correct?
You have Thursday, the 18th.
Correct.
And the 11th, right, as well?
Okay.
The 11th.
Correct.
So let me back up. You have the 11th at 6:30.
I will not be able to be here on the 11th.
That's tomorrow.
There it goes. You actually need, for the agenda requirements that I was talking about, you need 24 hours notice. So
Okay.
you actually won't be able to meet tomorrow at
Okay.
6:30 since we're already more than 24 hours out.
Is there any possibility for Friday?
Yes, I can do Friday.
I could do
Doug?
Friday.
Anyone? Lawrence?
I can do Friday.
You
I
can
could
do
call in possibly if we have that available.
Okay.
So yes to Friday?
Yes to Friday?
This week only.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So Friday the 12th
Friday
at
the 12th.
6:30.
Correct.
Okay, and then we have the 15th, and then for the remainder of the week of the 15th, did you have on the 18th
We'll meet at 5:30.
at 5:30? Okay, and then the following week, do you want to schedule that far out? Okay,
Yes.
22nd at 6:30,
Correct.
Thursday the 25th at
6:30.
6:30,
Mhm.
Monday the 29th at
Yes.
6:30,
Correct.
and then we go into August the 1st. Do you want to go that far? We have Cultural Arts Commission, and I think I think they could probably move. Again, that's an assumption on my part.
Yeah, they commonly meet in the other room as well, so
Okay.
this room would be available.
And any staff conflict with that?
I have one date that conflicts. I'll be on vacation on the 22nd,
Anybody else?
and I'm scheduled to work on the, among other days, 25th, but I've actually, 25th is the only day that coincides with these meetings that I have to work, but I can
And I-
probably schedule something this far in advance to where I can be able to make the meeting.
And I'll be in New England from July 30th through the 18th of August. So, I mean, if that's too large a chunk of time, you can let me know. But I would miss the 1st and the 5th.
And I'll mention that's one of the reasons we have 9 members is because we do know that there will be conflicts and everybody can't be at every meeting. So it's expected that there will be some gaps, and that's.
And for those instances where we do have to be out of town, is it possible to call in? Okay.
Given the short time that we have, how would you feel about adding an additional meeting, perhaps?
Is there any way, I guess I'm a little hesitant to add meetings until we have our full 9 members after the 16th. Is there any way we can wait until after the 16th when those new members are in and then add some meetings? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that may have the added benefit of us kind of seeing what kind of progress we've made at that point in time and deciding, wow, we really need extra meetings, or maybe we're doing pretty well and we're all right.
I mean, I'm definitely open to extra meetings. Obviously, we have to get the work done. I don't want to have this be wasted time. I just am hesitant to start having extra meetings without all 9 of us.
Has the council had discussion of whether they will indeed appoint additional committee members?
No, because of the way the resolution is put together, they have to appoint by resolution. The only way that could happen on the 16th would be a walk-on. And so while I'm anticipating that they're going to want to do something, it will be something that's actually walked on at the meeting, and they'll have to figure it out then. And as you know, they can't talk about decisions outside of the meeting. So,
Right.
My guess is what we'll do is we'll put together a resolution for their consideration, and then they can either add it to the agenda or not at the meeting on the 16th.
All right, and then if council should review the resolution at the meeting on the 16th, at that time, would they vote that same evening?
Yes.
To appoint?
Yes.
Okay.
So they would be available anytime after the 16th
Okay.
to be
So then we
on
would
the-
have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6 meetings after that.
And one thing I'll mention, you can always tentatively schedule these meetings as well, so that we can make sure that we have a placeholder and room and a kind of understanding what it is, and then you can make a determination later on whether you're going to hold those dates and whether the other members can participate when they get here. So you're not.
Quite honestly,
it's not in stone here.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I would feel really good if we could get some dates on the calendar
Sure.
and know that those dates are negotiable. That way we do have confirmation of the room. Anyone thoughts? Is that?
I would agree with that.
Did we finish going through the 5th with confirming what all the way through the 1st and the 5th of August? You have those dates both.
So what I have is through the 1st of August at 6:30. Do you want to go ahead and look through the 5th?
Yes, please.
Do you know what the Parks Board, how they meet?
That's our last.
They
hurrah.
typically meet in this room, but I believe a couple months ago they switched to the executive room. So
We can.
yeah, we can't have this room. Yeah.
So then Monday the 5th at 6:30 as well.
Correct. Well, given that we agree that we could potentially use additional meetings, does anyone have any thoughts on days that would work?
I do think twice a week right now is probably to start. I mean, I know we'd like to schedule more, but we've put a lot of meetings on the agenda already. So, I mean,
Yeah, that's 8, not counting tonight.
yeah.
My thought, Beth, is that because council will need to review our recommendation on the 6th, that perhaps this last week of July would be really important for us to really hone in on where we are and polish up the recommendation that we'll be making.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I guess I think that in a week or two, the calendar doesn't fill up that fast, does it, in this room? I mean, at this time of year.
Not the evening calendar. The meetings that are on here, the Planning Commission, all the regular boards and commissions, those are pretty much set. So in the evening, the room is empty. It's just a matter of your guys' availability and staff's availability.
Okay. Okay.
If I could just interject real quick. The one thing I would ask you to keep in mind is that depending on what you're going to be doing, and if you're going to be asking our office to draft some ordinances, if it's just a minor change to what was done before, that can probably be done by the next day. If you're asking for sort of a whole, drafting something from cloth or a whole revision that's going to require some research, it may not be possible to actually get you a new draft the very next day. So we may need some of that sort of 2-day time period in there to be able to actually get you something to work with.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the
Okay.
meetings are from 6:30 until 9 p.m. So I would be okay. I mean, once my time is blocked out on each meeting, I'd certainly be okay. If we have to, you know, if we're in the middle of something, we can go longer each night,
Oh, I
maybe
understand.
rather than schedule
Last
additional
Monday?
meetings.
Is staff okay with that?
Yeah, I would, it's up to you. We're here to support you,
A
but
little
typically,
bit longer.
my experience is after 9:30, the quality of product you get from staff and the committee members typically goes down.
Okay.
But it's certainly up to you to guys decide what timeframes you want to use to meet.
Okay. Let's plan on going 6:30 to 9:30. So we've got a good 3-hour chunk, and then play it by ear. Is that fair? Okay. So we have a preliminary schedule. Let's talk about how we'd like to move forward with the rest of our agenda for the evening. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I do think that possibly we need to address how we want to handle public comments. I also feel like, well, that's it. I think we need to think about how we're going to address public comments.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons I asked the question earlier of council was I do think public comments are vital in this process. So I think that at every meeting we should take public comments, but I think that they should be targeted toward specific agenda items for that meeting. Otherwise, we can get lost in whatever anybody decides they want to talk about, even though we're coming to a meeting to try to focus on maybe two very specific things. So that'd be my only thought there.
I would agree with it. If somehow we could come up with a motion that would limit the public comments to the ordinances that we've suggested that are on the table, and then that way we can kind of take one agenda at a time. And next week we get this stuff, and then there may be different people that want to comment on this different ordinance.
Chad, are we able to do that? Are we able to say you may only make a comment about X, or if we open it to public, are we opening it to public?
You can ask the public to comment about a particular topic, but you can't ask the public to only comment. You can't regulate their viewpoint of what they're saying about that particular topic. But yeah, if, for example, you have an ordinance on overnight parking, for example, and you want to take public comment on overnight parking, you can limit public comment to that specific topic, and then move on to a different topic and allow public comment at another meeting. That's absolutely fine. One thing you may want to consider is just having a general public comment period, maybe at the very beginning, to get ideas that you may not have thought of, and then narrow the list down of public comment at subsequent meetings for that particular topic that you're going to be discussing.
And to that end, I think tonight would be a good opportunity for public comment on general ideas
I
at
would
some
agree.
point.
I would agree. I'd make a motion to allow some time. I don't know if it has to be a definite time. We can play it by ear, but allow public comment for general ideas they feel. Because I'm sure there's people that either didn't get an application in or didn't get it in on time or didn't have the time to attend 8 meetings that would like, I'd appreciate their input.
What are we asking for input about?
Anything that they would like for us to consider or think about as we move toward drafting or considering drafting of ordinances? Am I hearing that correctly? Yeah.
Absolutely.
The one thing you may want to consider is how long you may want each individual to be able to comment. That's a decision that the committee gets to make, but sometimes there's some benefit in saying they have 4, 5, 10 minutes, whatever it is you guys decide.
I would be partial to a 3-minute comment period,
Okay. I was thinking,
just to really streamline
mhm.
and focus. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was thinking 3 to 5 or 3 or 5, or with the option of,
Split the difference and go 4.
with the option, if you're, as a chair, do you have the option to say, you can continue on for another 2 minutes or something? Or?
I don't think I would like to do that, because I think that it's important to be fair,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a rule.
Yeah, you want to apply the rules evenly to everyone. Now,
Correct.
certainly, if it's best practice, and it doesn't always work out this way, but it's best practice if you're going to have a time limit such as 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, that you allow the person to speak for their time. And then if members of the committee have questions of the speaker, then once their time has expired, then you can ask them questions to sort of follow up and clarify some of the comments that they've made. But that way, your questions aren't taking away from their time.
Okay. So, do I need a motion for public comment? Or we can just add this as an agenda item, Sylvia?
You can, and one thing I would recommend is what I call don't get motion happy.
Yeah.
You don't need a motion
Right.
to everything.
Okay.
So basically, kind of a rule of thumb, where you want to have a motion is if there is going to be a decision.
Okay.
And after discussion, if you find that you might need to come to a conclusion, and you know that some of the members don't agree with that conclusion, then when you're done discussing, because basically a motion and a second stops discussion.
Right.
Okay, so once a motion is received, the motion does not carry until you have a second. If you don't receive a second, the motion dies. Once you receive a second, you cannot be discussing that any longer. You have to call a vote.
Okay.
So think about the time that a motion really isn't necessary until you're going to make a decision and then stop it.
Okay, perfect. So I'm hearing that everyone is open to public comment. Is that the case?
Mhm.
All right, so perhaps we should discuss a little bit more. It's 7:45, and we've got quite a bit of time left this evening. So I feel like we should maybe have a little bit more discussion amongst ourselves of other things that we'd like to consider working on amongst ourselves, and then perhaps open up some public comment.
Sure. I'll speak if I may. In doing some research in preparation for this, I've come across 2 items that I've heard discussed in the community as possible ordinances that I believe are actually just outright prohibited by state law. And so I just wanted to clarify that with council and take those items off the table if that tends to be the case. One would be firearm and ammunition sales, which clearly seems to be prohibited by Oregon Revised Statute 166.170. You confirm that?
Yeah, and a matter of fact, I believe Sylvia has a copy of a memorandum that our office had prepared for the council that the council has made public that she can share with you that goes into some of the details of that.
Sure.
So now might be a good time for Sylvia to distribute those to you all. But you are correct. The state has basically preempted local jurisdictions from almost any type of regulation of gun or ammunition sales.
Well, it's pretty clear
Yeah.
and the second item that I came across was in the realm of minimum wage and living wage ordinances. And Oregon Revised Statute 653.017 seems to be clearly preempting local governments. And I can read it. Except as provided in subsection 3 of this section, the state of Oregon preempts all charter and statutory authority of local governments to set any minimum wage requirements. And the subsection 3 is a local government may set minimum wage requirements, A, for public employers, B, in specifications for public contracts entered into by the local government, and C, as a condition of the local government providing direct tax abatements or subsidies for private employers with 10 or more employees. So unless we wanted to get into one of those 3 specific cases, it seems clear that we are preempted from.
Yeah, I apologize because I am sort of jumping into last minute here. I am not as familiar with the minimum wage regulation as I am with the gun regulations. Certainly from what you just read to me, it sounds like you're preempted. The state can preempt someone basically by, the only way in a civil context the state preempts someone is by specifically stating that local jurisdictions are preempted. And they appear to do so in the statute you just read. Certainly, I can confirm, to take that off the table tonight so you don't have to continue the discussion, but I can confirm
I
that
think
with
we'd like
our
to
office.
just continue the discussion for sure.
Yeah. And,
Can you report back in the
and
next meeting
yeah,
about
absolutely.
that? Okay.
And I apologize again that I'm filling in at the last minute. I apologize. I can't answer that question off the top of my head.
Naomi, did you want to add to that?
Oh, I would like to add that in Washington, D.C. today, they did just pass the living wage large retail.
Accountability Act.
Yes, I think that'll be a great precedent for us if we want to look at that and draft ours using theirs.
Again, if we're allowed to by law. I mean, we're not in Washington, D.C.,
Well,
and
yeah, it's a different
we
Oregon
need to
law.
understand what the Oregon statutes tell us is allowed or not allowed.
I think that, one of the charges that we have in this special committee, as I understand it, by council and what I've witnessed and heard from the public is to work together to draft ordinances that would better define how we want to see our community and how we'd like to see businesses and development function within the community. And it sounds like, based on some of those exemptions, that there may be some possibility to provide some assurances to employees within our community to have a fair wage, and perhaps the new legislation that was passed in Washington, D.C. could provide a precedence for us to review as a consideration. Just a thought.
Yeah, my only thought would be if we're expressly prohibited by the state of Oregon from doing that, then we should clarify that before we spend time drafting an ordinance which may be moot.
The big difference is it's sort of a hierarchy. So the federal government can preempt states from doing things. The state can preempt local jurisdictions from doing things. So since Congress is passing a law related to the federal minimum wage, that'll preempt states from being able to say the minimum wage is lower than that. Likewise, if the state says that we as the city cannot regulate minimum wage, then that takes it out of our hands.
Right.
And so that's just the issue that I'll need to go back, or someone from our office will go back and let you guys know, does the state really preempt us from doing that? Is there some wiggle room in there? There were some exceptions to that general standard, and maybe there's other statutes that provide other exceptions to that. Generally, cities have pretty broad, what they call home rule authority in Oregon to be able to enact regulations for the public health and safety, which include things such as the minimum wage. But when the state comes in and says, you cities may not do that, that's when our hands are tied. And, the guns are a prime example of that, where, they've absolutely taken that off the table. And again, I just apologize. I don't know about the minimum wage off the top of my head.
And is that the case if you're within close range of a school, an elementary school as well? The guns?
The regulation of guns. Yeah, our ability to regulate the sale of guns or ammunition as a city is preempted, and the legislature has specifically reserved for itself the ability to do that.
And I can read that for you as well. Except as expressly authorized by state statute, no county, city, or other municipal corporation or district may enact civil or criminal ordinances, including but not limited to zoning ordinances, to regulate, restrict, or prohibit the sale, acquisition, transfer, ownership, possession, storage, transportation, or use of firearms or any element relating to firearms and components thereof, including ammunition.
So,
I mean, we don't have to like it, but that's the state law. So.
and we are limited in some areas. We recognize that. But I think the things that I've heard repeatedly from community members since, over the last several months has been concerns about ongoing public safety and the costs, additional costs that might be put onto residents on top of our additional, current tax base. So I think that we do need to spend time looking at areas that might be impacting the, costs related to public safety. So, we've talked about, we've heard suggestions of camping bans, and that's something that I think is very reasonable because we don't currently have, if you look at the camping, you don't want to be paying for additional police protection out of our own pocket. That's not going to be coming out of the store's pocket. I mean, so that's something that citizens have absolutely expressed an interest in. Whether or not a large retail store is going to be open 24 hours. Again, we don't currently have large retail environments open more than, beyond. I think Safeway is probably the one that's open the longest for large settings. And again, it's a cost factor for the public. I've heard a lot about the concern for wages in the city related to not just for the employees, but also if we do have a large employer coming in that has a lower threshold than some of our other businesses, the cost that puts onto, the burden that puts onto the public that exists here already. It also undercuts some of our existing businesses if you have someone who's saying we're going to use as a business model part-time only staff so that we're not covering healthcare costs, we're not covering other types of costs. And that's something I've heard over and over. It's about protecting the employees. It's also about protecting I think many of us are very fiscally conservative, and we don't want to be paying those costs on an ongoing basis for an employee, basically subsidizing. So and it's not just about one employer; it's many employers. But there's a certain threshold where if you're able to do business at that level, then you really should be able to provide those things, and so that they wouldn't be coming out of our pocket. So I definitely think that living wages.
What is the threshold?
I think we'd have to discuss that further, but I think that that's something that's absolutely worth exploring in terms of what are we able to do under
Most likely
state statute.
billions, right? Most likely.
Yeah.
We're not talking small.
I mean, I completely agree with you that those are valid concerns. I think that the concerns around those are broad. They're national, they're international, they're state, around wages, workers' rights, and they're important topics. But I think they aren't driven in any one locality. It's shifts in trends in global and national economics that are driving those things. And I think that it's this trying to solve those problems in a town of 18,000 is going to be challenging. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try. I'm just saying that that's a consideration. I mean, we already have budget concerns. Do we want to add additional staff to our city to be involved in labor law and employment law? And those are expensive concerns. We don't have expertise for that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't consider those items. I'm just saying that we have to consider that we don't have staff expertise. We don't have staffing for that. We don't probably have general legal counsel who's familiar with those laws. And it's a very complex labor and wage and benefits laws. It's extremely complex at federal and state level. And I think we need to tread very carefully about involving the city of 18,000 in that kind of thing.
Scott, Doug,
That's okay.
sorry.
Happens all the time.
I'm sorry. I would actually disagree with you a little bit because our city council already engages in collective bargaining agreements with groups within the city, like the police department, for example. So my disagreement with you is that we really do have staff with expertise that could help. That's.
So I just have one. I guess I need some clarification about what we're actually trying to accomplish. Are we concerned about at all whether the city is going to be able to sustain and uphold any of these ordinances, or are we just trying to give some ordinances that we think are a good idea to the council to discuss? Because I think those are two very different things. I think if we are looking for an ordinance that's pretty cut and dry, at least from my opinion, about 24-hour parking, that's, to me, a whole different, that's pretty simple, in comparison to saying we would like a living wage. So my concern is, it sounds to me like Doug is saying that he agrees with what you're saying, but what he's saying is, what does the city then do with the ordinance that we give? So as a committee, are we concerned at all with what the city's going to do with an ordinance that we give them to vote on? Or are we just saying, this is what we think is an ordinance that should be voted on? How far are we going in the responsibility?
Well, I guess I would make a general comment, and certainly there could be things that would be done that would be very difficult for staff or the city in general to implement or maintain or manage. However, that's one piece of a bunch of other pieces that would go into creating any ordinance. So I don't know that I would start taking things off the table necessarily at this point over general concerns, but certainly if you put something before council that's not manageable or is going to require them to hire additional staff and budget for it, I think that ordinance probably would have issues at the council level and maybe even at the citizen level if they, depending on which way they would do it. So certainly I would think it would be one component that you want to think about in every ordinance that you do, but it's a little bit early to be probably getting too wrapped up around that.
And I think, in my experience, even if we don't have the ability here to manage it in a town of 18,000, you can contract with Foley. It's, these processes don't have to be put onto, one staff. I mean, you could have things that are complaint driven, so that if there are complaints, and sometimes in San Francisco enacted laws several years ago that they've managed, and they found that the complaint rate is actually very low. So, I mean, this is something that you can, I mean, City of Portland is currently looking, they're going to be contacting with Boley for, their new sick leave ordinance. So there are mechanisms in place that we don't have to be shut out of being able to do something for our residents based on the fact that we're smaller.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting we take anything off the table. I was just thinking long term what the potential cost would be, and that's something that I think we should consider when we get into that specific item.
Yeah, and certainly the threshold that gets set will have a large determining factor of that as well. If you set it that it only applies to a handful of businesses, and it's something different than if it applies citywide to all businesses.
I would also be interested in speaking long term, applying ordinances and thinking about how our ordinances affect the existing businesses already. I'm sure that you guys are all aware there's many, for lack of a better word, similar companies other than Walmart, Regal Cinemas, Kohl's, that pretty much pay minimum wage part-time people, and how whatever ordinance we come up with would affect those businesses that are already here in Sherwood.
And I'd like to propose that we, as a group, that we do some business outreach, that we go and we, go and meet with some of the larger employers, the medium-sized, smaller employers, to reach out to them to find out how many employees they have. And the city may actually have some of this information already, how many employees
We have to tell the city when we apply for our business.
Okay, so, but I think it'd be interesting to have some of these conversations about what could work, what couldn't work within existing and potential future employers.
Could we invite them to a meeting possibly? That'd be interesting. Target and
I think, how does that work? I mean, what's the purpose?
Well, yes to all the above. We can do whatever. We do have very limited data on businesses, other than what we collect on business licenses, and even that's in a proprietary database. It's hard for us to get information out of, but we certainly can collect that type of information if you want. We certainly would be happy to reach out to certain businesses, but I'll be quite honest, there's going to be a limited amount that we can do given the time frame we want. We just don't have a ton of staff resources to be going out. So if we're talking about contacting 5 or 6 businesses, it's a lot different than contacting 25 or 30. But we certainly will do what we can to reach out. So the more organized we could be, maybe if we have a list of questions that we want to ask them, or something that we can be organized and send that out, that would be great. When you start talking about national organizations, it gets even more tricky because you pretty much have to go into the actual facility itself and talk to the manager if you want to get a response. It's been our experience. They get busy and they don't really have available email addresses. But if it's a handful of things, that we certainly can do that. If it goes to be too big, I think that's the conversation we'd have to have with council and the city manager to see what could be.
The obvious person who may have this information is Nancy. I mean, at least some of it or more. Sorry.
Am I not loud enough? Usually I'm plenty loud. I think that obviously Nancy could be of great help in this. I can tell you, I mean, in all honesty, on my business license it says that I have 0 employees because I have to report those who work 20 hours or more, a few more days a week. And I don't have any of those, only me and my husband. So I just want to keep those certain things in mind when you're looking at information. Like Tom was saying, the information we give as a city license, for a business license, is completely different But I do think that Nancy in the chamber would be very helpful for this information because I know that it's her job. It's the chamber's job to keep track of who has how many employees. And she also might have a little bit better inroads, possibly, than one of us walking in cold and speaking to a manager.
I
So-
actually, fortunately, because of my profession, have a lot of national contacts. So some of the larger retailers within the city, I already have
Great.
emails to. So I could potentially have an in to get some information.
I just
be
want to
helpful.
stress that we not only focus on the big employers,
Oh,
please.
absolutely.
Because I think it's very important that the small and medium and what we think are small businesses might not be a small business. What we think is
Absolutely.
a large business also may not be. And so my concern as a small business person is that when we start talking about businesses, we not only focus on what we think of as giant national corporations, because there are some large businesses operating under a Sherwood business license that we may not consider a national chain.
So are you suggesting a living wage for small businesses, for example, or?
I'm not suggesting anything. What I'm
Okay.
saying is if we're going to ask businesses for information, that we not only focus on what we consider the top tier,
Okay.
that we not be the filtering system in that aspect. That would be my only concern. Because I think that there are large businesses, again, I've said it already, I think there are large businesses working in Sherwood that are not national chains, and I think that there are small businesses and medium businesses that are pretty concerned about what you consider a living wage could do to our business. And I do mean our.
Yeah. Well, as a segue maybe into another kind of conversation, if that's okay, one of the things that I heard you say, Rachel, was that there's some things that you feel like are pretty black and white issues in terms of things that would be reasonable to impose as an ordinance.
I don't think
within the city.
reasonable. Sorry to interrupt. I don't think reasonable is what I meant. I think
Okay.
what I mean is straightforward, simple.
Uncontroversial.
Straightforward. Okay.
Straightforward, not even controversial. I mean,
Yeah.
straightforward. I mean, it seems to me as if we don't want people to park overnight for 24 hours at a place. That's a little bit simpler. That can apply to almost anyone in the city. Then we're not talking about certain places, although McDonald's is open 24 hours. And so there are things to consider, obviously, where do employees park, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that when you start talking about living wage and you start talking about what it is that I have to do for my expenses to keep employees under my roof, that's different. It's a bigger conversation than how many people park overnight in your parking lot. That was my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's fair.
I think the overnight camping ordinance, I think, is fairly straightforward, and I think most people in town and most of us in this committee would probably agree with it. And in my research, we have some sort of overnight camping ordinance already, so it may just be a matter of amending that. I think it applies to public places right now, and if we amended it to also apply to private businesses at least.
Yeah, I mean, are you asking a question? Or
It looked like Tom
we
had
camp in our
something
trailer
to
behind
say.
Fat Milo's the night before the Robin Hood Festival and the cruise in.
Conditional use permit, though.
I'm just saying. So there are things that apply to everyone that you may not think do.
If the question is, do we have restrictions on overnight parking in public areas, we do. I don't know if that would be the code section that we would want to modify, or if this would end up being a new code section. That would be something that the attorneys would have to look into.
Yeah, I mean, I think along with the overnight camping in what would be even considered a private area, I mean, there's also issues like vehicles in disrepair that may be broken down vehicles that could potentially have oil leaking from them and going into storm drains. As a property manager, I see that very regularly. And I would think that would be a pretty straightforward discussion that we could have if we felt like that's something that would be helpful. I think that that's an issue of health and safety. And as Sherwood is looking at town center plan, and as we're considering growth and development between now and many years to come, I think the issues of health and safety and appearance and the perception of our town is important. And so perhaps those are things that we can consider as we're looking at possible ordinances. How does everyone feel about that?
I would agree that the parking issue or the overnight parking issue is probably something that we can come to a rough agreement on tonight. I would think the only thing that's been left unsaid is there a time limit for any parking, or is it going to be, no overnight parking midnight to 6 a.m. or when the hours of any retail business are closed? But I think we could probably narrow that down, and if we could knock one of these ordinances out tonight.
It's a hard one not to agree on. I would also ask in the same line that you're at it, we could, if we have time at all, to address pesticides in light of Target.
What do you mean by in light of Target?
And the fact that they sprayed a pesticide that killed the bees around their trees.
Oh, right.
I feel like there's some precedence for us to be able to ask or discuss that, but I don't have any idea. I do wish it would be something that we discuss along the same lines that you're talking about with the vehicles of disrepair.
And also its proximity to the Tualatin National Wildlife Refuge, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any pesticide use ordinances already on the books that may already apply to this case, or so?
There may be. If they are, they're rather dated and probably would need to be updated to be current. I couldn't say specifically. We'd have to look at our code and see what we do have there.
I do have.
But it probably wouldn't be what you're looking at.
I do have one more. I'm sorry if I have too many, but in light of the discussion that I've heard about regarding waste and waste management, obviously we have a business in town that's owned, family-owned business in town, Pride Disposal, that I feel like might be worth a conversation from somebody on the committee in regards to how they feel, or have they been approached, or what the plan might be for waste disposal for the actual development itself, or any developments in town. But I know that they do offer composting. I don't know what we can require, but I feel like if there is something we can do in order to promote larger businesses making a smaller footprint. I will hold up that New Seasons recently received a reward for having zero waste. So this isn't anything that's unheard of. And they're an Oregon company. So maybe this is something that we can discuss. Obviously, it would affect more than one company. And Pride, my point is, I know that Pride has in place programs already to help that, because we compost. So maybe we could consider something in regards. I've heard a lot of people discuss the cost of waste for these large developments.
Okay. Beth, do you have anything to add at the moment? No? Okay.
I'm not sure if this ties in, but there's something to do with the number of bike parking spaces allotted to that particular development,
Which particular
the
development?
Langer development.
Okay.
So I don't know if we can look at that. Is there an ordinance for bike parking?
There is, and we actually require a lot of bike parking compared to what actually is utilized in Sherwood. We kind of follow under Metro's rules, and certainly bicycle commuting is more common in the downtown area. But we hope that changes over time, and that those spaces are used. That would be in Chapter 16 of the Development Code. So probably wouldn't be able to make a change there, but we haven't, our utilization on the number of bicycle parking spots that are used, we actually require for that particular number, they would actually have to have covered parking spaces, bicycle parking spaces as well, is probably around 10% at this point, so.
And I think it's important too to remember that any changes we make, it can't just be for one development, that it has to be citywide. So that, that we might want to make requirements for some of those things that they're already built out. They may not, we can't go backwards. Often within, a lot of, we only apply to newer, so.
Another topic that we've looked at, or that some have mentioned, is whether or not Sherwood is comfortable with retailers being open 24 hours. So can we have maybe some comment on that?
I think our police staffing is a little short right now, even with the Kohl's being open. They're having a hard time keeping up with that. So I think having one open for 24 hours is going to tax our police department.
Why do we think they're having a hard time?
Just the increase in shoplifting and just needing to go and to be present around the city where needed.
I guess Do we know? I mean, has there been a crime-ish uptick since Kohl's has been opened? Okay. I'm just curious. I have no idea.
Well, a couple things. First off, during the budget process, Jeff Groth made it clear that they're stretched for resources, and we know that retailers have a fair number of calls. Target, for example, has about one per day typically, and Kohl's will probably be a little less just because their footprint's smaller, but there will be a lot of calls that are to any retailer of this national chain. They just tend to generate those type of calls for shoplifting mostly. And in particular, when Kohl's opened up, we had incidents pretty much every day for the first few weeks. People were somewhat testing the system, but also it's just the nature of that business. So,
Well, and professionally speaking, managing large developments, I can tell you that one particular shopping center that I managed totaled approximately 300,000 square feet, and on an annual basis, I spent more than $250,000 on security alone. And so I think that the issue of safety and safety concerns is really valid, because I'm not sure that you as a private entity, I'm not certain that we can, and staff, please correct me if I'm wrong, that we can invoke rules on private ownerships on whether or not they have to or should employ security efforts. But I think knowing that the chief has expressed a concern of short staffing, that, this is something that we really ought to consider.
So
And hopefully the public tonight can comment on that a little bit.
When we
as
say
well.
not 24 hours, what do we want? I guess.
Yeah, I think that this is a great time to maybe hone in on maybe this.
Maybe till
as a-
11, or go by whatever. Maybe
We have to start
whatever
talking
the
size
other-
because we have bars in town.
I think
Well,
Safeway
size
is
and
something-
also type of business. I
Right.
think
Sure.
there's a lot of different ways you can slice that.
Right. How late is Safeway
We're
open?
open till 1.
Till 1, so
And
maybe
then
1.
Yeah.
6.
They're closed for 5 hours.
But that's it's a time of night when you'd hope that the police would be monitoring neighborhoods more than the commercial districts. They're, and I see them, occasionally you'll see them driving through the neighborhoods late at night. I just feel like it's important that we maintain a police presence that's able to accommodate the needs of the entire community.
I think there were only 2 on duty at one time. Is that right?
typically in the evening, yes, there's two on duty, more during the day.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I just am trying to understand what we're thinking of proposing, because we have businesses that are open. That's 19 hours instead of 24. So where do we set the limit?
Sure. Well, I think you guys are doing a great job of outlining some different things. Just maybe a suggestion here, might be a good time if you're done kind of going through your list of things you might want to consider, maybe taking some public testimony in regards to some things, to take some things to consider and allow yourself a few minutes to collect your thoughts. You might also want to consider taking a little bit of a break, as well as it would be good for us, for you to be able to come back and, his favorite animal is a duck. But coming back to giving us, the more specifics you can give us, the better off, we more effective we will be able to get back and hopefully reduce the number of meetings. And also, I put on here an agenda item to kind of talk about how you want to, what you need from the staff and city attorney's office. On particular items, if it would be beneficial for the city attorney's office or staff to go research some example ordinances to bring back to you if you guys don't really know what you want to do per se. That's something that could happen as well. I know in the overnight parking, I think we looked at Beaverton and another city to kind of get some examples of different things that other cities in Oregon have done, so we're also not recreating the wheel. So Think about that imbalance, that you can just give us direction, we can kind of go draft an ordinance, or if it would be more beneficial, we can certainly go do some research and bring back some examples, which might help you as well.
Thank you, Tom. So I'd like to maybe take Tom's recommendation and recap what I've heard, and please do interject if I haven't heard everything correctly. Considerations for ordinance at this point, based on this discussion this evening, it looks like we've talked about overnight camping and parking regulations. We've discussed open close hours. We've discussed potential living wage review, and Chad has agreed to get back to us on that. We've discussed pesticides, and I'd like to add to that, if that's all right. In addition to pesticides, just use of general chemicals, and perhaps consideration that large retailers and others provide MSDS sheets to the city as maybe an additional check-in point. Rachel brought up looking at waste management and potentially putting together some kind of ordinance to encourage composting and other more sustainable trash disposal options. Did I hear that correctly, Rachel? Okay. Bicycle parking was brought up. I'd like to add maybe consideration of carpool parking as an option for larger retailers as a potential option.
You mean as employees or?
For employees. I think that as these large developments come in, and even the smaller retailers are coming into our town, there is a lack of parking available. And as we look at the Sherwood Town Center plan and additional development, parking is a big focal point of those discussions. So I think if we can put together some recommendations on carpooling and some incentivizing folks to come to Sherwood, that would be potentially fruitful discussion. Am I missing anything?
The only thing that I would add is when I applied for this this committee, my two considerations were traffic safety and the safety for the residents. So when we hear from our community tonight, I would be interested in hearing what kind of ideas they might have on traffic safety, or if you guys have any things on traffic safety that can be affected by an ordinance that wouldn't fall under land use or planning. I'd be really interested to hear that.
Really great point. Tom, is the traffic cap under Chapter 16 as well?
It is.
Bummer.
Myrna, you did talk about vehicles in disrepair, which I didn't hear you say in the recap.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. At this point, is there anything else that we'd like to add to our list of potential conversation points? Or should we open it up to public?
Sure.
A break? 5 minute break?
Small break.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And one thing, after the break, but I think when you say living wage review, I guess we don't need to do that tonight, but thinking about breaking that down into what it is, I think we were talking about minimum wage laws that were preempted, but that doesn't necessarily incorporate the entire sphere of living wage issues that at least have been talked about in other meetings with council. So, so I think you've got a pretty good list on everything, but I would think that you might want to think more about how you can maybe break that down into different pieces. So maybe it's not all one ordinance, or maybe it is one ordinance, but what do you mean by that? I'm not sure that I understand, or if the attorneys could take that and actually do anything with that at this point.
I'd like to specifically propose that we have the attorney review the Washington, D.C. Large Retailer Accountability Act that passed today in Washington.
That'd be great. Yeah. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll open up for public comment.
Okay, so committee, during that break, if I may, we did not set up the clock, the microphone, or the testimony forms before public comment because it was not on the agenda.
Okay.
So just if you guys want to just go ahead and just ask individuals to come up, we don't need the sign-in form. We don't really need a clock unless you want the clock.
Okay.
So for this one meeting, we'll just let the committee manage the comments coming forward.
Sure.
Okay, so basically, people can either stand if they choose. This is being recorded, so the cameras aren't going to get a lot of the audience members, but if people want to come up and at least state their name, it's really not necessary for name and address and all that information, just as long as the record shows, first and last name.
For the sake of hearing everyone, is it all right to bring a chair a little bit closer to us?
Sure.
Yeah. And a mic maybe by chance?
Yeah, and we might be able to get a table out here too
Okay.
in the break here. So.
Okay, great. All right, let's take our quick break.
She is. I thought she's outside on the phone. It might be interesting to at least maybe get a hand raise of all the public that wants to talk.
Yeah, if that's okay. Who would like to talk? Could you just kindly raise your hand so we can get a gauge on time? 1, 2, 3, okay, 4. Okay, great. That's fantastic. So what I'd like to do is take public comment until, how we're going to meet until 9:30 tonight? Yeah, okay. So if it's okay with the rest of the committee, I'd like to open up comment till about 9:15. Is that acceptable?
9.
9?
If I could just interrupt.
Please.
Generally, what you need to do is set a time limit on the amount of time each person has.
Okay.
And you really, it's difficult to set a time limit on, say, we're stopping public comment at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Because if you have more people who want to talk, you should generally let them as long as the meeting's still going on.
Okay.
Now, there are circumstances where you can't say we're only going to take public comment up until this time and then allow people to have additional public comment at another meeting,
Okay.
if you're doing so. But given that you only have 4 people or so, setting a time limit and then just going with that would probably be a much better course of action.
Okay. Let's do that. Tom, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and just real quick, one thing that we do is obviously when we're making minutes of meetings, we have to listen to the recordings and get information. So I just want to encourage everybody to get friendly with your microphone, make sure that you can actually hear it when you're speaking. That's a good indication that it's loud enough that it can be actually transcribed.
Agenda or not.
Yeah.
So Sylvia, your contact info is on the City Council web page.
Yes, and all of our emails here at the city are last name, first initial. So it'd be Murphy,
Okay.
MURPHYS, at sherwoodoregon.gov.
Okay, great. And that's it.
Quick question
Oh, sure.
You had mentioned you had templates. Templates for what exactly?
Well, I don't have the templates, but other cities, I was being descriptive that other cities have accomplished this, as Nancy mentioned, Warrenton, and of course
Accomplished
Washington,
what?
D.C.
Specifically?
Of how to address living wage issues, health care, the part-time, full-time issues with employers over a certain size. And also, as it was brought up to me just a few minutes ago, metrics for determining the size. When you say 50 employees, is that full-time, is that part-time, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have any specific information to say how it was done, but it has apparently been done numerous times, and I can research that out and feed that to you. And it might give you a leg up.
Thank you.
That would be helpful.
Okay? Thanks.
Anthony Bevel, I live in Sherwood, have for a number of years. First of all, congratulations. You're on the committee. I guess it's going to be one of those things that be careful of what you wish. You might get it. But I was a little taken back, Doug, with your comment about do we, want to take on this. I mean, the city of Sherwood, little town of Sherwood, was #1 city in the U.S. a number of years back. You can now make Sherwood #1 again, if that's what you want to do. I mean, you have to tackle these issues about big box store, about is Walmart, and I'm not going to mince meat about big box or Walmart. Is Walmart good for Sherwood? I don't believe it is. Not at all. Okay? The question about additional staff, we have a lawyer over here. We have a whole fleet of lawyers, don't you, Chad? Yeah, okay. So additional staff to research whether, we can put these ordinance into force or not. We have our lawyers to do that. And again, you chose to be on this committee, in which I really congratulate you again. So, take up the mantle and tackle those hard issues about a living wage, about whether Walmart is good for Sherwood. Again, it's not. And just a little tidbit, my last little comment. Last night, AOL Online, Walmart voted the second worst food chain in the U.S. And here, first #1 city, small city in the U.S., we're going to have the second worst, I hope not, it's not a done deal, second worst supermarket in the U.S. So I'll leave you with that. Oh, my dog in the fight, and we all have dogs in this fight, is that I live off of Roy Rogers, and even now, I've got traffic coming through there during peak hours that once this Walmart thing, if it goes through, I hope it doesn't, pray to God it doesn't, it's even going to be worse. So my suggestion is you put up speed bumps all around, and I've been told the city attorney is the person to speak about that. So again, slow down this traffic. Thank
Anthony,
you.
before you walk away, I'd like to ask a question,
Sure.
if that's okay. In related to your traffic concern about your home, is that a general traffic concern during all hours, or do you have concerns about particular hours?
Oh, it's during all hours. I live Roy Rogers and Edie Road. I mean, new development on Edie Road, people come through Houston to Lindley to Roy Rogers, Lindley, Houston to Edie Road. And once if this mess Walmart gets through, people are going to use Lindley, Houston to get over to 99. It's going to be a shortcut. So, yeah, it's a big concern. It's a big concern.
Thank you.
Right.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Give us some thoughts.
So I just want to say that I live in Sherwood. I don't live in Washington, D.C. or San Francisco or anywhere else. So I totally agree we should start there and not reinvent the wheel.
Could you tell us your name,
Oh, I'm Jennifer
please?
Harris.
Thank you.
Sorry. And use those ordinances as we can as a starting point. Don't reinvent the wheel, but if you can make the wheel better, then do that. But I live in Sherwood, so I don't really care what other cities can or can't do. What I care about is what we can do. And whatever we can do to make my children's future, my future better, to make this a place where my children will want to stay and work and not have to go somewhere else to work, would be fantastic. So the living wage, for instance, I realize we've heard some talk about it, can't do it, can do it. I would just really encourage you to get to the meat of that and figure out a way to make it happen if you can, and decide who it would benefit or not benefit. $1 billion seems like a good place to start. Maybe companies that are bringing in $1 billion or more. I don't think we have a ton of those in Sherwood. But just maybe that's a good starting point. And some of the other ones that you guys have talked about I think are great. I just want to encourage you not to throw anything out because the way it's written for San Francisco doesn't work here. Just start with it and make it better. Sherwood it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Claus. I want to first make a general statement And I want you to understand that what you do is your own business in this sense. But what's brought us here today is some of the early remarks that were made in this meeting about citizens' comments. Now, let me tell you what you have on this one side. And Mr. Jacobs does a good job of enunciating it. There was a guy named Abramov, actually, he was a Russian, who went up to the Empire State Building when Woodrow Wilson dispatched the force that actually kept Stalin in power. And he objected to it. And he threw these leaflets down. He did not recommend violence. He did not recommend overthrow the government. He just said Woodrow Wilson was a damn fool. Now, the amazing part, for those of us that have taken history classes, know that Wilson conceded he was a damn fool afterwards. It was that expeditionary force that gave us the slaughter of a lot of people in Russia. Now, the reason they put Abrams in jail, because he had dangerous tendencies. Now, nobody could figure out what that meant. Now, a fellow named Learned Hand about blew a cork. Now, Learned Hand was probably the smartest judge we had, but he had a problem. He was a Jew, and he was smart. And that's a lethal combination among lawyers. You don't want to be smart, you don't want to be a Jew, and you don't want to be ethical. Everybody looked at that. Brandis went to Dewey and said, how can you restrict ideas? How can you restrict thought? And Holmes came up with the marketplace of ideas. Now, they both voted to send that man to prison. And by the time they left the Supreme Court, they turned that stupidity on its head. We don't do that anymore. They had a march by a bunch of idiot Nazis in Illinois, and they just let them march. And everybody ended up laughing at them. When that kind of drivel, and if it's drivel, comes out of your mouth, nothing happens. Let me make a statement to you. Your attorneys suppress information. They are not time, place, and manner content neutral, and this committee will fail if you play that role. It's disgusting, in my opinion. And by the way, the first case I ever had that I worked on went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we established that land use planning was controlled by the First Amendment in the case of signs. And in political signs, you couldn't regulate them unless you had a very good reason. Now, I'm just suggesting that what you're doing here tonight is a very healthy thing. Because I'm going to tell you something, if ideas hurt you, you really got a problem living in America. We would not be where we are today if places like Stanford and Berkeley and Harvard did not let ideas go where they can go. Now, first thing is I keep it open. Number two, and there's no degradation of the staff here, and if you're in the shopping business, you know this. Walmart is a mass merchandiser, exactly as Target is. They are not a shopping center. They are not a shopping mall. They are a standalone enterprise, as is Kohl's, Bi-Mart, I can go on, but it all started with Toys R Us. It's not going to hurt if you bring some of that information in here to regulate. You have a problem, excuse me?
I was keeping time at Miracle's
Well, what's your
request.
time? You have a time limit?
It was 4 minutes as we established.
Well, then, we should discontinue the conversation, because there's no point in having conversation. I'm going to tell you what I've been trying to say for some time.
I'd love to hear it.
That's exactly what Hitler did.
I'd love to hear
That's
you.
exactly how the retailing and the Kristallnacht and everything happened in Germany, was the idea that we can't have freedom, we can't have shopping, we've got to cut it off. And if you're that smart, work on your own.
Jim, I appreciate your comments, as I'd like to speak for the rest of the committee. We do appreciate what you have to say, and
Can we let him finish?
We
Maybe?
decided at the beginning of the meeting that we would keep it at
Oh.
4
4
minutes
minutes.
for each speaker.
I'd like to ask you one question, if that's okay. We did limit everyone to 4 minutes, but I just want to make sure that I understood what the point of what you were saying is.
The point of what I'm telling you
And if it's
is
okay,
fairly simple.
yeah, it is.
Ask a
And
question.
so I just want to make sure I understood.
But these
what-
unobtrusive, non-reactive measures that disrupt speech are not only rude. they're
So what I
the
heard you
fact that
say,
people ought to be
Jim-
Someplace else.
So what I heard you say, Jim, is that you'd like for us to keep an open mind and that you'd like for us to entertain the ideas that have been brought forth today. All of the things that we came up with. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think what I tried to tell you is you're making information based on information here.
Okay.
And that's the one thing that has been shut out of this entire process ever since we decided to put something someplace in pure restraint of trade.
Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is assure the public that all of us have volunteered on this committee to represent what we hear the citizens of Sherwood asking. And it is our intention to work together to draft ordinances that will promote the livability of Sherwood.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I have to say, I'm not exactly clear what you were referring to in regard to the attorney.
Well, the whole point I was trying to get to is that the one point you have in all of this is the one thing you can't do legally is restrain trade. And that's exactly where this thing is pointed, is restraint of trade. And I'm just telling you.
Okay.
You can regulate Walmart, you can regulate any mass merchandiser, but you can't restrain trade. And what's gone on here is we've restrained trade. And you're not going to get around that until you correct it. And you're not going to get around it with 4 minutes, and that's how we got there, was Barry Elternham insisting on 4 minutes and shutting off the citizens, lying to us when we asked him if it was Walmart, and acting like they weren't lying.
Okay, thank you. As a personal opinion, not an opinion of the committee, I can assure you that I do not believe that anyone is above the law, whether a private citizen, a retailer, an office user, or any other business person. And it will be our intention and it will be our charge to work together to draft ordinances that are within the law and that we feel will give the voters of Sherwood an opportunity to have a voice.
Can we ask a question about that? How are you going to have an ordinance that's above the law when you have a law firm here that caused the problem? I mean, I know that's a huge question, but we had these secret meetings because of this law firm. Why don't you get somebody in here to give you advice that is a lawyer and not a political advocate?
I believe that I can tell you safely that it is not our charge or ability to choose the attorneys for the city. And if the city of Sherwood has a concern about its representation, that's a separate issue of what this committee is working toward. Tom, would you like to add to that?
Just say that the city council is the one who selects the attorney for the city of Sherwood, and you're a board of the city council, so you probably should rely on their judgment in this case.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to give us any thoughts or express any concerns with the ideas that we've discussed this evening as we consider ordinances moving forward? It would be really helpful for us to understand concerns or suggestions that you might have. Yeah, please.
Eugene Stewart, I own property here in Sherwood. One of the things that bothers me is that we're proceeding down this road and I can't see what the vision of Sherwood is. when our new city manager first came in. I sat down and talked with him, and that was one of the things that was on his agenda, was to proceed to find out what the vision of Sherwood is. It's like a huge ship at sea in a storm with no rudder. You're going this way and that way, back and forth, but we have no clear vision where we're going or why. And the other thing, a little economics, is that I can recall, I used to be able to drive over to Hillsborough, the back roads. I've used this analogy before. But I bet you I could point out 6 to 8 different places where they had a little grocery store and a gas pump. Most of those are gone except for a couple. One's been turned into a restaurant. The reason they are no longer there is that due to the economics, they cannot sell enough product in a small store to make a profit. They can't make, quote, that living wage for the family that they used to make. And I've seen box stores, one down in Klamath Falls that was one of the first ones in Oregon. He operated on, his bottom gross was about, or net was about 1% to 2%, but he still made a fairly good living, more than a good living wage. So what I'm trying to point out here is that a lot of these stores only survive based on the volume that they push through the store. A lot of small businesses cannot survive in certain environments. So we need a good mix brought in to the community. Back in the 60s, when I sat on a committee for the land use plan, one of the things that we were very well aware of, we were a bedroom community. And we could never afford anything because we were a bedroom community. School issues were always coming up. Taxes were always going up. So until the city sets a policy on what a good mix of business and residential is, and we strive to meet that mix, and it's probably somewhere 40% business and 60% residential, you're going to have all these problems where you can't hire enough people to maintain public services. But please realize is that in the schools, businesses pay much more, or they pay more than their fair share into the school district, into the fire district, everything else. Especially in school districts, residential areas do not pay, their property taxes do not pay for their cost of the service they're receiving. So we need to figure out what that balancing point is and work very hard towards it. The last 10, 15 years, we were on a binge building residential and only residential. And I've lived here long enough to know that when you become a bedroom community is not a livable community as far as I'm concerned. I can remember when there was only 500 residents here, and we had 3 grocery stores in town, and they supported 3 different families. Well, you can't.
Eugene, you've just got about 40 seconds, just so you know.
Those size grocery stores would no longer survive because they could not sell enough product to make a living. So we need to think more. We need a better vision than what we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. So we've got some more time if anyone else would like to share any thoughts or concerns, suggestions even. Okay, thank you, everyone. In an effort just to recap for the special committee, the public comment, I think that what I've heard is consideration of A living wage is really important to folks. Looking at employee addition versus employee loss is important to folks. Traffic concerns based on hours of operation, focusing on the things that we can do as a committee, looking at sales figures and how those pertain to economics. And lastly, Eugene's comments, I think, are particularly, to me, helpful, because I think that as we're looking at ordinances and as we're considering these ordinances, I think that his point of establishing and understanding what this vision of Sherwood is really why we're here and why we have agreed to sit on this committee and draft these ordinances with the help of staff. So on behalf of the committee, I can safely say thank you to everyone who took the time to come and to talk to us about your thoughts and concerns. You've been heard, and I appreciate you and your commitment to Sherwood. I'd like to actually have some maybe conversation among us on what else you feel like you've heard, and maybe some response on thoughts that folks have mentioned. Anything you'd like to add to the discussion for this evening?
I'd like to add something. I've read every one of the petitions. That's, all of the comments that people have given. I'd say the majority of people are concerned about the living wage and also crime and traffic. So if we could prioritize and set those on maybe an agenda for how we want to tackle the different ordinance ideas. Like the bike parking one is obviously, it's an interest of mine, but to me it's not the priority.
Okay.
So if we could just set a priority, that'd be great.
Okay.
I think you bring up a great point, is that we should discuss, what are the agenda items, specific agenda ordinance items for the next meeting on Friday. One of the things the city council does that I kind of like is the council comments section, so maybe that's something we should consider doing ourselves. I felt like our discussion that we started around the 24-hour ordinances was cut very short because we wanted to move on to citizen comments. So maybe if we have time, we could get back to that briefly this evening as well.
I would say that listening to the residents tonight, I would think our priorities are fairly clear: living wages, traffic, and safety. And then we could just break those down. I'd like to get back to at least the 24-hour parking or the hours of operation tonight before we leave, and maybe we can have kind of a rough idea of where we want to go with that.
So with that in mind, Chad, I think those three issues, it would be really helpful for you to perhaps come with some recommendations, or not recommendations, but some examples of what other jurisdictions have done, and that way we have an opportunity to take a look at language and how we feel we could modify or better craft for Sherwood.
So just to be clear, the three areas are living wage, crime, and traffic. For Friday, do you want to pick one of those topics in particular for us to focus on? Do you just want to?
Yeah, I mean,
the living wage one, I think is
the living
obvious.
wage is a major priority.
Great.
Actually, since I'm not going to be here on Friday, I would love to be here in person for that particular discussion. Would it be possible for us to start with safety and crime? Because that seems like one that we are.
Yeah, and I think true too. I mean, the big part to me of the living wage discussion is what our limitations are, and so I think that may require some research.
Right.
And so maybe that would be a good topic for next Monday. And and the other thing I'd say is that I think it makes sense to maybe try to focus on the items that maybe there's more clear consensus on first, just to kind of get those going, and someone could start writing language and getting that to city council earlier in the process, and then tackling the harder issues, the more challenging issues, the more complicated issues, next.
Okay.
So, I mean, to me, those two, the things that are clear, the overnight camping, the 24-hour or whatever the time is would be two items that I think could be clearly on the agenda for Friday to maybe try to wrap up on Friday.
Yeah, I would suggest just from
Yeah.
that's a good idea, just because it's a lot easier to do research on those particular items and bring things back to you quickly, so you might be more productive on Friday, and then on Monday do the living wage. So we're looking at camping bans, vehicles and disrepair, pesticides. I'm not sure if we can get waste and waste management done in that short period of time, but the 24-hour retail, use of general chemicals would kind of be on that list from what I could see. And
When we talk about the 24-hour, we're also talking about crime. Are we trying to talk about those in the same conversation? Because it sounds sort of like when Naomi brought it up, she was saying that the reason the concerns about a restaurant or a store being open for 24 hours, any place being open for 24 hours, is the crime. So are those, because I keep hearing crime, but then I also hear 24 hours. So are we talking about 24-hour parking as one 24-hour and then 24-hour hours of operation as another?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say, what I'm hearing is that
Okay.
those are separate issues.
Okay. The one thing I want to point out is the obvious crossover there is that someone has to police the non-24 hours camping. So I feel like they do cross over in one aspect.
Well,
And I don't want to
think-
miss that. Somebody who's going to be responsible. We talked about earlier whether we can require security or what we can require.
But you know,
I don't want to
what's-
lose that.
You know, in my opinion, with 24-hour regulations in terms of camping, parking, those kinds of issues, and please jump in on this if I'm wrong, but if the ordinance is ordained, and then what can happen from there is property owners will then have to manage those things themselves. And that is something that could be written into lease agreements and rules and regulations, and those things wouldn't necessarily mean that we have police chalking tires or anything like that. It gives property owners a leg to stand on and say, this is an ordinance.
But what if the
within Sherwood.
retailer is the property owner? What are we putting in place for them to police themselves? I guess that's my question.
I guess the way I would see it is that, like an overnight camping ban, for example, obviously the property owner has some responsibility, but ultimately if they're at home in bed, then it's going to rely on the citizen, report to the police, and police go check it out and then send the person on their way or issue a citation or whatever, right?
I think these are all great questions. I think it might be beneficial for the attorneys to give some examples of how other cities have done that. We kind of had this conversation at City Council already, and there are definitely ways that other cities have dealt with this, where it's the property owner's responsibility, but then there's also the city has tools to hold the property owner accountable, and so we can give you guys some ideas, some different tools that other people have used to do that. So those are all great comments.
This is going to sort of sound like a joke, and it's partially meant to be that way, but it's partially serious. But there's a famous saying: "It's like if you don't like sausage, if you like sausage or the law, don't watch either of them being made." And the reason I say that is that the devil's always in the details with the laws. So as Tom was saying, there's lots of different ways to enact these prohibitions and put penalties or enforcement mechanisms in place. For example, you could create, as part of a nuisance ordinance, these either 24-hour parking or the dilapidated vehicles, and that could put some burdens on the actual property owner to abate those nuisances, and if they don't abate the nuisances, they could be charged for the city doing so. And that would give them an incentive, therefore, then to enforce it, whether they're the property owner or they're renting it out, to actually enforce that. So there's different ways to craft these laws to get at what you want. So I think the best way is for us to give you some examples, and then you can figure out, well, what is the best way to make this a Sherwood ordinance as opposed to copying just some ordinance from some other jurisdiction.
Thank you. I think that would be really helpful. Great.
I do think that we need to spend some time clarifying what the living wage. I'm sorry, I'm a business owner. When people start talking about regulating wage, it gets very scary for us.
Yeah.
So I need to understand, and I think Tom brought this up once already, and it's not happening. Either we call it living wage or we call it what we're actually talking about, which I think is regulating part-time, full-time. We're talking about actually an employee environment, am I right? And not just the wages that are being paid.
think the Large Retail Accountability Act that Washington D.C. just passed today would be a great starting point for us to look at. And that might, and I can share that with Tom. And I have the latest version. It was emailed to me moments after it passed today.
Well, yeah, we heard,
So I could-
you know, there were some examples in warrant and some other things. So I think what would be beneficial would be for us to do a little bit of research and hopefully try to get those out before the meeting on Monday. And then maybe as we have that meeting on Monday, really start talking about what we mean. What does it mean to this committee when they're talking about living wage and what type of
and I
ordinance
think,
might be that,
I think
that too.
I think maybe what Rachel was trying to get at was beyond the wage issue.
Right.
Is that there's been a lot of talk in the community about regulating, employee-employer relationships in regards to, hours, scheduling, at moving from part-time to full-time, and I know that there's an appetite for those things, and I think that they're valid for us to discuss. So I think
That's
you
what
were
I'm
getting
talking
at that
about.
more
Right.
beyond just
I mean,
the
we can
wage
ask
itself.
that in a large
but-
employer pay $25 an hour, but if nobody can work past 10 hours a week, it doesn't matter. And so I think for me, it's more about the language at this point when we keep saying living wage, but I think we're discussing something much bigger than that. So I want to make sure that what's addressed and what's researched is what we're actually talking about.
So is the wage separate from the other issues
Exactly.
around
Right.
hours and?
Because I think that Chad said something that I've read before in Oregon law about when you're talking about the hierarchy and whether we can set wage. If we can't set wage or we can't discuss wage at the city level, what can we do? Is I guess where I'm getting.
And I think we're getting hung up on the word wage. I mean,
Well, of course,
minimum
but I pay
wage
them.
is that, but you're right. It's overall compensation is really what you're talking about.
Right.
And working, conditions and everything else. I think we've kind of got that. So I think we know where we're going. But if you guys could think about that, and when we meet on Monday, be real specific about, okay, when we're talking about living wage, I mean these 5 things, and break it out into different things, because those probably will end up being separate ordinances if they move forward, or things that you would want to consider.
And I think Rachel wants, I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom Reedon, and I think that once we have some examples of language in front of us to dissect and to really discuss, perhaps that will alleviate your concern of what is being discussed, what's not being discussed, what's important, and maybe what's not important. Is that fair that we table
Yes,
it
absolutely.
until we have something in front of us?
Yes, and I guess
Okay.
my point is,
Yeah.
the more we start talking, we keep talking about the fact that we're discussing wages. I don't want to lose sight of anything else that may be attached to an actual wage.
And that's fair. Good.
So just one quick thing, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, didn't actually have it organized, but we're trying to create an interested parties list to be able to send out emails to the public on meeting times and everything, because this is happening really fast, so we want to be able to, say when we have meetings and give information out. So in the back of the room, there's a couple of sheets of paper where people can put their name and email address. We'll add them to a distribution list. Obviously, we won't get all the emails that you get, but at least we'll give them the major emails as things are going on. So we'll send out an email tomorrow saying that there's going to be a meeting on Friday and go for there. So that at least that there's some. So we at least have some sort of list so we know how to communicate with people.
And is there an email address they should contact, or a person in particular to get on the list?
No,
they're
if they
hearing?
just fill out the form in the back with their name and email address, we'll add it to the list and then they'll get it from there.
But is there a contact within the city that's managing the list? So if we wanted to say to somebody, oh, contact Sylvia, she'll get you on the list. If they're not here, or they couldn't come, or they're watching, or.
Yes, so you want them to contact you or me?
Do you have a way to put an online
Prob-
form or something like that on the website to collect those addresses? You don't have to do
We
that.
used to, and unfortunately the system's broken right now, so that's why we're kind of going back to the old school method of putting a list out there. They can email either Sylvia or I, and we'll get them on the list. It's also, though unfortunately, our distribution list has to be created by IT, so it's not working the way it's meant to be, and that's just because we have a new web page and the tools are broken. So it's email Sylvia or I, we'll make sure you get on the list.
If there was a list available, would you be able to, take that and send out one saying if you'd like to participate in this list? Because I know there's a lot of, emails that were collected. I mean, the city, that they're in the letters that were sent to the city. A lot of email addresses contained in those.
Yeah, well, I think for the committee, we need to start something fresh. We But all the applicants who weren't selected, we send an email out. They're already on the list. But to go back and collect stuff from the past, we don't have the time. And so, and we don't know that they're specifically want to be in the community. So.
Well, on the form that they filled out, the petition, there was an area where they could write their email. So, I mean, I don't think it would be very difficult to take not everybody did provide their email address, so some people just did their phone number or nothing, just their name. So.
I think what I hear Tom saying is that based on the resolution of this special committee, email addresses need to be collected from this point forward on interest based on what we're working on here. Is that is that correct?
That's what I'm suggesting. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule there,
Okay.
to be honest with you. But we need to be able to manage this with the resources that we have. And so
I just think a lot of these people are wondering, what happened, they've signed the petition, and was their signature, did it have any fruit, are people listening, and so if they had feedback from the city, that would be amazing to them.
Perhaps we could, as Beth suggested, on the city's homepage, as you've been providing updates on what's happening, provide that as an opportunity, and then folks can distribute that as they're watching or listening to these meetings, and I would guess that the distribution list will grow pretty quickly.
Yeah, one thing we could certainly do is we can just add, to the page and the information that we put out, we can just add, even at the bottom of the agenda or something, just a little note down there that who to contact and to get on the list. So we can just start maybe advertising that, and all the communication that we put out, we'll just create a standard paragraph that we put out and do that.
Question for you, Chad. Is there anything in the rules, in the public rules, that would preclude committee members from sending out an email asking if folks would like to be on a distribution list or not?
Not at all.
Okay, so any of us with contacts within the community can send an email asking if folks would like to remain on a distribution list, and then if we get reply yeses, we can just forward that distribution list directly to Sylvia. Okay, well, it sounds like that could alleviate a lot of time and effort on many parts.
That'd be great.
Cool. Does anyone else have anything to say this evening?
I'm wondering how long we're serving on this committee. Is there an end date in mind, or are we just sort of, is it August?
The deadline date.
It sounds like, based on our calendar, that our final meeting will be August 5th, and then our recommendations will be made to council on August 6th. And at that point, the committee will disbar.
Right, so Section 5 says the special committee will make written and oral report and policy recommendations to City Council at the first council meeting in August 2013. We're anticipating that it might not actually be the 5th or the 6th. The terms of the special committee members will end at the conclusion of that meeting. So.
All right. Anything else for this evening?
Do you feel like you wanted to finalize, was it the 24-hour?
Yeah, I know that we're putting that on the agenda for next week. I guess we haven't gathered a lot of information about 24-hour ordinances. I'd really be interested to see what the perspective of business owners in town, small and large, are that are either open longer hours now or maybe would anticipate being in the future. I also think we need to make sure we consider the impact 5 years down the road of a potential business that might come to town, or the types of businesses is more interesting than I think there's restaurants that are open 24 hours, and I think there's people that like to eat in the middle of the night, and I don't know that I would, I'd want to know what the citizenry as a whole and get different perspectives on how they feel about that. I think that that's different segments of businesses, and it may make sense to have different regulations on different business types in addition to business sizes. Pharmacy, we don't currently have an all-night pharmacy, but I think there's potential that we could in the future, and we might want that in the future. If my kid wakes up sick at 3 a.m, I might want to be able to get something, a mile away from home instead of 5. So I just think those are things we need to consider and understand what the community as a whole wants. I know there's some people who are, very vocal about, 24-hour operations across the board, and I want to understand what a lot of people in Sherwood think about that, and not just in relation to Walmart or any specific business or business type.
Would next Thursday's meeting then be a good time to talk about 24? Because I think that, again, it's also one that probably deserves quite a bit of attention specifically, because there are different kinds of businesses. I mean, I think Sherry's is open 24 hours now. And
I think there's 3 businesses in Sherwood right now that are open 24 hours. Sherry's, Subway,
Right.
and I forget the third. Was it McDonald's or something?
The drive-through. I think, some of the ordinances that I research, it tends to be focused on large retailers. Again, it's, different having a 30-person, 30-table restaurant open versus a 75,000 square foot,
Absolutely.
145,000 square foot store.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and this will get into the conversation in regards to thresholds, which, I think is kind of what you're saying. And we're also going to have, I would like the city attorney's office to do some research on, what we can and can't do. Mr. Claus brought up time, place, manner, and content neutral. He's talking in regards to the First Amendment and sign codes and those type of things. But we also need to be careful about restraining free trade and potentially getting into areas where we're being difficult. Because are we just talking about retail? Or are we talking about retail and industrial? Are we talking about employment? You might have different thresholds for each and every one of these different things, but we also want to make sure, like Mirta said, that we draft ordinances that will meet all the laws so that we don't become the next test case between the Supreme Court. I don't think anybody wants that. So, Chad, if you guys can be thinking about that and maybe be thinking about how those different things could be structured so that we don't end up stepping over lines, I know I would appreciate that.
So, just to be clear about what you guys want for Friday, because I want to make sure that we're giving you what you want, because there's lots of different days being thrown around. Do you want a discussion and examples of these 24-hour ordinances, those being the overnight camping / parking and the being open for business 24 hours? Is that for Friday, or is that for the following Thursday?
I think the first one for Friday, the second one for the following Thursday is what I heard.
About Monday.
Or
Monday was living wage.
So for our Friday meeting, to clarify, we're hoping that you can provide us information, maybe some examples of language on overnight camping. Perfect. Dilapidated vehicles, pesticides, use of chemicals in general. Pardon?
Storage of chemicals.
And storage of chemicals, maybe requirements of reporting, that sort of thing. And then for Monday, we'd like to see language pertaining to living wage, minimum wage issues. And for next Friday's meeting, next Thursday's meeting, the 18th, we would like information on and examples of 24-hour regulations pertaining to businesses being open, what kinds of businesses, that sort of thing.
And information is getting done correctly. I have a comment from our person in the booth that some people aren't speaking to the mic, and so there's no way that their comments will actually be able to be captured. So that wouldn't be good.
Thank you. So if anyone would like to let us hear your thoughts, please feel free to come up. I don't know anyone's names, so. Okay, great, thanks.
Timer.
Oh, great, thanks, Doug. Can you be the timer first?
Sure.
I can be very loud, so I don't want to be too loud. Nancy Taylor, Sherwood, Oregon. First, I would like to just ask a question of the committee, and then I'd like to give you 3 ideas. The first one I would ask is, would any of you need to disclose anything like a relationship to a big box store, such as you're currently selling property to one somewhere in the 4.5 square miles? That would be the first one. The second one would be, do any of you have any family relationship to anyone who might benefit from you being on this panel? And then the few things I wanted to add were that we have worked very hard as citizens to collect the living wage petitions, and there are many comments on it, and I know they are housed right here in this building, and I would recommend that you read them. They are comments from the folks behind me. The second thing I would like to add is, again, Washington, D.C. did manage to do this, as has Warrington, Oregon, as has many other very small communities, and we can help you with those names. We're pretty good at that. I have 2 brothers that are lawyers, so I'm going to be pretty good at that. And the last thing is, I hope that you understand that there are a lot of petitions going around in the community. So if you need more help, there is something called Monkey Survey. We can help you put together a survey and send it out to a large number of people that are both business owners and citizens. That would be it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Come on up.
Before she sits down, or you can sit down, I just want to disclose something, and now is a really good time when we're talking about disclosure. I do work for the fire department. I want everyone to know that when I applied, I put resident, but I do business as a firefighter engineer in this district, and I am frequently assigned to the Sherwood station. However, the opinions and the reasons for coming on here are my own, and I do not represent the fire district in any way or form when I speak my opinions. And I don't want to give anybody the wrong perception that I was chosen as. When asked if I did business in this, I do a lot of business. My doctor, my chiropractor, my eye doctor, Safeway, Target, all those places. But in the Oregonian, it was shortened up firefighter engineer. So I just wanted to clarify that I am a resident, I do business, but I don't speak for the fire department. Thank you.
And for myself, I don't represent any clients that house any businesses in Sherwood at all. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I also discuss, I don't do business here, but I do have clients that I just want to, for the record, I'm not representing them here as a resident of Sherwood.
Come on up.
My name is Bruce Toyan, and I'm a resident of Sherwood. And this will be brief. I'm interested more in process or mechanism for providing information. I've done a fair amount of research on this issue, and there's information that could be useful. There's a tool called the Economic Impact Review that might be very useful in terms of evaluating the economic impact of not just big box stores, but any large retailers in that category in terms of jobs. For instance, I believe there was one community where there was 115 jobs created by, I believe it was a Target, but it wiped out 163 jobs. So you've got job creation, but net job loss in the community, and that was a loss of $21 million to the community, which is a nice objective kind of issue to look at. And also, I have references and so forth. There's a lot. I just was having a discussion just a few minutes ago, and also as I didn't quite catch your first name, Taylor. Nancy Taylor. Nancy mentioned And I was going to amplify on it. There are a lot of, it's a tricky situation, but a lot of communities across the country have done this successfully, and so we have templates to go by. And so I think that would be very, very useful as well. So I would like to know what is the mechanism. I may or may not be able to attend all the meetings, but if I have information, how can I provide this? And I know there's issues about the quorum and so forth that I think it was Chad was bringing up. How can I feed you guys information?
It would be helpful for you to email Tom directly, if that's okay with you, Tom. And then if there's something that you'd like for us to look at, perhaps Tom can email it to the committee.
Well, Sylvia and I could talk about that. Actually, probably would best come into Sylvia. She typically coordinates the information flow in and out to committee members. But certainly, public testimony is great, but written testimony is sometimes just as good because certainly it'll be distributed to all of you, and you can have a chance to review it at your leisure.
What we'll do is more than likely right now the special committee is set up on the city council's page of the website. So that's kind of where you exist. That's your home.
Okay.
The thought is to get the special committee set up with an email, just like the city council has citycouncil@sherwoodoregon.gov. The special committee will be specialcommittee@sherwoodoregon.gov or something similar to that, so that people can go to the website, send an email directly to the committee as a whole. It would not go to committee members individually. It's to the committee as a whole. Those emails are pointed towards me. That allows me to keep the record. What I'll do is I'll then forward it to you. So it's really important if you guys are going to provide a different email address other than what we already have to provide that quickly.
If Bruce submits information or anyone else chooses to submit information via email to you, would that then be placed on the agenda for our next meeting, or we would just be able to refer to it?
Basically, what will happen.
I have a question about the living wage on Monday, and this kind of dovetails with what we were discussing earlier. Is that conversation strictly talking about wage, or is it open to the entire breadth of the ideas we've heard in the community about managing part-time, full-time, part-time worker, Bill of Rights, all these other ancillary employment issues, or is it strictly wage? Because I think that's a big distinction. Those are two very different things to me.
Yeah, I would really be interested in seeing what has been done in past in DC, and how any or all of those items could potentially apply to this community.
So if I can make a suggestion, because I think this is actually a pretty big issue from the little that I've been involved in this project thus far, that has many more aspects to it than all these other things that you're talking about. So for Monday, I think it makes sense for us to come back and give you some advice about the minimum wage issue, and then come back with some examples. For example, the congressional bill that was just passed, or was it actually the City of D.C., the Washington, D.C. bill that was just passed, the Warrenton regulations that people mentioned during public comment, and any other examples that we can find related to living wage for you guys to start having the discussion about what aspects you would like to potentially talk about including in an ordinance. And then once you narrow the scope of that, we could then give you additional research on those issues, as opposed to spending the time and the city's money researching this broad array of issues that you may have no interest in actually pursuing.
I think that would be great.
That would be great. Okay.
So, and then also there were the topics of bicycle parking, carpool parking, and just parking in general. I could certainly make copies or have community development make copies of the sections of the community development code that relate to those. When would you like to see those? Yeah, they're in Chapter 16, but you guys have expressed an interest, so if you want the information, we're happy to provide it.
Okay.
If you want it, and I guess my question is, do you want it and when?
I think, for the sake of tonight, I'd like to propose that we table that discussion until after we've had an opportunity to maybe take a look at some of the other more pressing issues. What do you? I don't know you well enough to read your body language, Rachel. I don't know you at all.
I am somewhat familiar with the bike issues because we just went through this in Old Town, which I don't know if it actually has the same rules because we don't have the same rules for a lot of different things, Tom.
True, yeah. The Old Town overlay has different rules.
Right. But I do know it was a concern for me as a business owner when they redid Old Town that there was bike parking. And so I looked at it and it looked pretty good. It is in line with what Metro recommends. When I say it looked pretty good, what the city has in place. So you don't have to take my word for it. I think it's worth it. I think most definitely if Naomi's concerned about it, she should read it and take a look at it. But it did look like something that wasn't. I think the only concern would be whether the rules are followed in a new development.
So, for the sake of our next agenda, would you be comfortable, Naomi, if we tabled that discussion for now?
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll mention that, we have been doing a code cleanup process. We've kind of paused it here just because development activities picked up and staffing levels. But those are still issues that can be dealt with through a different process, through community comments and all of your involvement in the community, which you guys have expressed, and we hope continues for a long time. So there are other ways to get there as well, other than this committee.
Great. Well, with all of that said, thank you, Chad, for stepping in, and thank you, staff, and everyone else for being here. Yeah, did you have another?
I just wanted to say one more thing, and listening to the public comments tonight, I feel like maybe some of the things I said tonight were misconstrued, and I just want to make it clear that I'm completely open-minded to everything on the table, and that my verbal concerns about proceeding with care and an abundance of caution and not acting without due diligence should not be perceived as being against or for certain things. That's just the way I work. I want to make sure that we're proceeding carefully and cautiously and looking long-term on anything that we consider. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With all of that, we are adjourned.